The British Transport Police do ride the trains all the time, as well as patrolling the mainline stations and the underground. Plus our community support officers. They'll all be in high visibility clothes over the next few days. There'll be a lot of activity as we bring more officers on duty, including our search teams, our explosives dogs, and a whole range of different technical aids in order to keep the system safe.
I'll take two more questions, one at the front and the last one at the back.
Mr. Trotter, Derek Tedder from Sky News again. Can you just tell me what precautions are you taking for a chemical incident here? You know, we've heard that you've said this is a standard bomb in your eyes, but what precautions are you taking for any subsequent chemical attack? We have highly developed tactical options to deal with chemical, biological or radiological devices. We've got all the state-of-the-art kit in order to go into the systems wearing that, as have the other emergency services. We do a lot of joint working with all the blue light services, and we're quite convinced that if we do have such an attack, we're capable of dealing with it.
Ken Knight.
Yes, just to confirm, London Fire Brigade, of course, is equipped and trained with such equipment for deployment, and did deploy such equipment, but there is no suggestion, as has been said, that there was any CBRN nature of this terrorist attack, and we didn't have to deploy that equipment at all, but it was available and ready at each of the incidents.
Last question there, please.
Again, from the Wall Street Journal, for Mr. Paddock, do you know whether the bombs were left in the tunnels or were on the trains? And also, how are your officers investigating this being organized? Are they staying in their normal units, or are you creating a new structure to deal with this investigation?
It would seem likely that the devices were on the trains, although that is to be confirmed by forensic examination. And we have anti-terrorist squad officers and specialist crime directorate officers who deal with the most serious offences in London deployed to all of these scenes investigating what has taken place. Okay, that's the end of this conference. Can I just say that while these people have been speaking, Casualty Bureau is now up and running. The telephone number is 0870 156 6344. But what obviously we didn't want is an overload of the system again. So could we ask that people ring their family and friends first of all to see if they're safe and well before they contact Casualty Bureau? So the first point of call should be with family and friends on mobiles or via landlines to make sure they are well and safe before they call Casualty Bureau. That would assist us greatly. I don't think we'll be planning any more press conferences here tonight. However, we will keep that under review. It is likely, though, that we will run a press conference tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow, and that again will be based here at the QE2 Centre. Thank you very much.
Meter Marble Arch ripped apart by
the end of joint news conference there by those in charge of the emergency services today, and we can speak now to our political editor Nick Robinson, who's at Downing Street. Tony Blair, of course, has arrived back there now, and I suppose, Nick, most chillingly, the London Police Chief saying that we don't know if this is over yet.
That's exactly right. Remember that the first thing the Prime Minister will want to do is to get briefed about whether there is thought to be any risk of these attacks continuing in the next rush hour later this evening or indeed till tomorrow. So he is meeting in what's known as Cobra. That simply is the name of a room, in fact, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, but in emergency situations, that is the room with which is equipped with the necessary equipment for ministers to get together with the Prime Minister in the chair, the Home Secretary at his side, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. They'll be given a briefing by Bill Jeffries, who's the security coordinator and advisor to the Prime Minister, recently replaced Sir David Omand, a new job that was created after the attacks on New York and Washington in 9/11. Of course, there'll be advice from other people involved with the Metropolitan Police, involved with the transport system and elsewhere. So first of all, the chance of other attacks. Second of all, he'll want information on what is known about these attacks. And then, of course, there is just the sheer organisational detail we were hearing about how London gets home tonight. Many people I've already seen just making my way here, wandering about the streets, wondering exactly how they're going to get back to their houses.
Nick, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Nick Robinson there at Downing Street.
Hello, good afternoon. You're watching a special programme on ITV1 and the ITV News channel on the day that terrorists brought carnage to London. A series of explosions have ripped through the city. 4 bomb blasts in a 60-minute period has killed at least 33 people. 3 tube stations were targeted as well as a double-decker bus.
Hundreds of people have been injured, 45 are seriously hurt. Hospitals across the city have been inundated with casualties.
Well, there appeared to be no warning or intelligence. London has been left at a standstill with the entire tube network closed down.
All bus routes have been stopped as police warn people not to make unnecessary journeys into London.
So it was during the morning rush hour that terror came to London without any warning. A coordinated series of bombs went off, 4 in all. At a news conference in the last hour, the emergency services have been giving more details, admitting they don't know if the attacks are over. These are the main points.
Police have confirmed at least 33 people have been killed in the explosions.
All the confirmed dead died during the explosions in the underground.
An explosion also ripped through a bus at Tavistock Square. Police say people were killed in that blast, but they don't know how many.
The highest number of deaths, 21, were on an underground train travelling from King's Cross to Russell Square stations.
7 people were killed by the explosion in a tunnel near Liverpool Street.
And 5 people died at Edgware Road in North London.
Police say they received no warning before the attacks. A previously unknown group has said they did it.
Tony Blair has described the explosions as barbaric. The Prime Minister has now returned to London from the G8 summit at Gleneagles.
And a special emergency number has been issued for people worried about relatives. It is 0870 15 66 344. 0870 15 66 344.
Damon Green looks now at a day of carnage.
The number 30 bus from Hackney to Marble Arch ripped apart by the force of an explosion. Just one of 4 confirmed blasts across the heart of the capital, leaving dozens dead and hundreds injured.
I heard the bang, looked down, saw a cloud of grey smoke, and then later on found out that it was the bus that went off outside the building.
How much damage was there to the bus?
Splintered like an old can. Top deck, just the seats exposed.
All emergency services and all hospital staff in London have been put on high alert, and while they say they are coping, it has clearly been a terrible struggle. Here at Russell Square by the British Museum, the injured from 2 blasts were treated at the scene. And despite reports linking Al-Qaeda to the explosions, the Home Secretary insists it's still too early to know for certain who caused them.
I'm not in a position at this time to give precise details, but what I can say is that 4 explosions have been confirmed. First, on a tube train between Aldgate East and Liverpool Street. Second, on a bus in Woburn Place. Third, on a tube train between Russell Square and King's Cross. And fourth, on a tube train at Edgware Road Station. As yet, we do not know who or which organisations are responsible for these criminal and appalling acts.
This clearly was a callous attack on purely innocent members of the public, deliberately designed to kill and injure innocent members of the public.
The blasts have paralysed London's transport network. 21 people are now confirmed dead at King's Cross Station. An explosion on a Piccadilly line bound for Russell Square, bringing chaos and fear to thousands of city workers, the ones who escaped with their lives. With the rescue operation still going on underground, passengers talked of the panic that gripped the train.
As we left King's Cross Station, within 2 to 15 seconds, there was a large bang. People were physically ejected out of the chair. There's flashes of light on the side of the tube carriage. Smoke immediately billowed into the carriage. It filled it. People started to scream because there was a burning smell. And everyone, to cut a long story short, thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers, praying to God, panicking, breaking the carriage windows with their bare hands, anything to get oxygen into the carriage, because more people tried, the more distressed they became.
At Edgware Road Station in West London, an explosion caught passengers on 3 separate trains. 5 of them are confirmed dead. Passengers have helped each other to get above ground, away from the scene of the original blast, and a second controlled explosion was later carried out on a suspect package.
People panicking, and then people started to calm down. People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
Now senior police officers are warning the London public not to travel.
There is no doubt that this is an attack involving explosives. There's no doubt therefore that it's a terrorist incident, and the message to people in London is to stay where they are for the time being, not to try and move away from anywhere. We've got the scenes under control. We are talking to TfL about producing a bus service. It is extremely unlikely that the tube service will open today. In fact, I can say I'm almost certain that it will not.
It's now confirmed that 7 people died in East London after an explosion between Aldgate and Liverpool Street, but it will clearly be hours yet before the full scale of the attack can be measured. Damon Green, ITV News.
Well, as we were listening to Damon Green's report there, the United States has announced that it is raising its terrorist threat level for all rail links and mass transit systems, as it describes, and not for airlines, but for rail links and bus systems after, of course, the bomb blast here in London. That, according to a US government official, that's just been announced.
Now we're going to bring you some pictures which are just coming into us of the M4 motorway outside London. This is the main arterial motorway which links the capital with Reading and the West Country, and you can see there the huge weight of traffic which is building up there. Also, of course, Heathrow Airport, one of the first junctions out of London on the M4, and you can see on the left of our screen just how gridlocked that traffic is this evening, and that, of course, is likely to continue throughout much of tonight.
Now, on a day Britain apparently became the target of Al-Qaeda, we can now look at how events unfolded.
Well, shortly before 10 to 9, at the height of rush hour, a blast hit a train in a tunnel just 100 yards short of Liverpool Street Station in London's financial district. 7 people were killed.
5 minutes later, an explosion hit a train between King's Cross and Russell Square. 21 people died there.
Then less than half an hour later, 3 trains were involved in a blast at Edgware Road Tube. Passengers on one train tried to smash the windows with umbrellas in an attempt to escape. 5 more people have been confirmed dead there.
At 9:47, a bomb ripped through a bus near Russell Square. An eyewitness reported the double-decker being ripped apart by the blast and nearby hotels were evacuated. It's not known how many people were killed on board.
Well, with trains and buses suspended and public transport at a standstill, the advice to people living in London is to stay at home and to avoid travelling wherever possible.
Scotland Yard has issued a casualty hotline number. If you're worried about family or friends, then call 0870 1566 344. That's 0870 1566 344. Well, hospitals across the capital have been inundated with casualties. Some seriously, some walking wounded. Chris Shipp has our report.
Right across central London, at each of the main trauma units, the injured were brought in, one after the other. The most seriously injured by stretcher. Emergency staff tested to the limit as they rushed to treat the wounded. Ambulance after ambulance pulling up to accident and emergency. Some of the injured able to walk, their clothes torn and stained with blood. Every one of the capital's hospitals on major incident alert. Ambulances queuing to gain access. The casualties kept coming in. But so did the doctors, nurses and surgeons, all reporting for work as the well-rehearsed emergency plans swung into action. And others were brought in by bus, London's famous red double-deckers ferrying some of the hundreds of walking wounded in for treatment. The same transport system which was so ruthlessly targeted, still able to play its part, and every patient with their own horrific story to tell.
We just pulled out of Edgware Road, and next thing I know, there's a large flash of light. Felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face. Was on the floor by that point. Yeah, I can't recall anything prior to that, any noise, any bang. And as soon as I realised, there'd been an accident, got up, had a look around, saw where the exits were. Train was a complete standstill, lights are out, a lot of smoke in the carriage.
All the windows in the middle of the train smashed and all the glass came, tumbling through. Lights went out, obviously, pitch black, couldn't see, couldn't breathe, everyone was coughing. And
what was the mood like in the carriage?
Well, at that point, everyone thought, oh my God, this is some kind of disaster movie, we're not going to get out, we're all going to die. And so there were lots of screams and people crying.
Above the busiest hospitals, air ambulances hovered waiting for a spot to land as they lifted the most seriously ill into hospital. And throughout the day, blood transfusion vans have been screaming across London. Stocks are said to be good, although the National Blood Service has urged people to keep their appointments. Chris Shipp, ITV News.
Professor Paul Wilkinson, a terrorism expert from St Andrews University, joins us from our studios in Scotland now. Professor Wilkinson, we were told that an attack like this was inevitable. Given its nature, though, it would appear there was very little that the security forces could have done to prevent it.
That's true, because it is extraordinarily difficult to protect train services and public transport systems generally in a crowded city at the height of the rush hour. And of course the terrorists know that, and the reason why we are pretty sure that this was an al-Qaeda-linked attack is because this is the kind of attack they have mounted in various cities around the world, notably in Madrid, where they launched the train bombings attack, which killed nearly 200 people. This is a movement that has no regard at all for civilian life. And they know that a coordinated attack is likely to be more lethal, so they were deliberately attempting to cause mass casualties and, of course, to disrupt the economic life of the capital. So I'm pretty certain that this attack was carried out by part of the network of al-Qaeda.
And how much planning, how much preparation would have gone in to something like this?
Oh, I think many weeks of preparation, because clearly the timing and the logistics, getting the explosives in the right place at the right time, all that had to be carefully planned. And of course they've managed to hide their intentions, their plans from the police and the intelligence services. And that again is typical of al-Qaeda. They are particularly good at maintaining a low profile, escaping notice among the public in a big city. And that is why they are such dangerous terrorist opponents for the police to deal with. And that is why we need maximum public cooperation and support to help the police. That means passing on every piece of information that might help to provide clues as to the identity and whereabouts of the people who planned and carried out this attack. We must remember that they are still at large, that other attacks on London and perhaps on other targets in the United Kingdom could be carried out, and it is therefore vitally important that the police pursuit of the people responsible for this is assisted by every possible means.
Professor Paul Wilkinson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching the ITV News channel. The headlines: at least 33 people have been killed in a coordinated terrorist attack in London. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
A previously unknown group called Al-Qaeda's Jihad in Europe has claimed responsibility for the explosions.
Hundreds of people have been injured in the blast. 45 are seriously hurt. All London hospitals are on major incident alert. Right, let's cross now to Scotland Yard, New Scotland Yard, and our crime correspondent Dan Rivers is there. He's been harvesting information from the police all day. What can you tell us now, Dan?
Well, very interesting, that press conference, to get a little more detail. The quick, rapid succession of these explosions and the way that they seem to have been timed to cause maximum damage, especially the one on the Edgware Road where they said 3 trains were damaged and a hole was actually knocked through into another platform. Clearly, whichever group carried this out has gone to a huge amount of planning and possibly surveillance on their targets to work out which trains would be the best ones to target, exactly which time would be the best time to strike to cause maximum casualties. The police insisting that they didn't receive any intelligence or warnings before these explosions went off. Brian Paddock was saying he's clearly shocked but not surprised. They have been telling us for months and for years that it's not a question of if but when, and clearly the day that everyone was dreading has finally come about.
Yeah, yes, Dan, and chillingly, as we keep repeating, he also said that the phrase, "we don't know if this is over yet."
Yeah, I must admit, it's very nervy down here. There's still a lot of police cars. You can probably hear one in the background. There's an ambulance, actually. A lot of police cars have been zooming up and down. A lot of unmarked police cars with blue flashing lights speeding off, presumably investigating reported sort of, incidents, bags being left, perhaps. I don't know at the moment if there are any sort of operations or raids going on. When I asked earlier on, they said so far they had made no arrests and no operations have been in place. But the feeling you get down here is one of real tension and real nerves. There's another police car coming past just there. Not quite sure if that means something else is going on, but this has been sort of happening all for the last hour or so. A lot of police cars heading up that way, actually. Not sure if there's anything going on at the moment, but as I say, a very kind of nervy feeling down here at New Scotland Yard.
OK, Dan, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, but of course we will come straight back to you should we get any more information.
Well, Dr. Shane Brighton is Head of Intelligence at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence. That is the UK's leading think tank on both national and international defence and security issues. He joins us live now from our Millbank studios. Dr. Brighton, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We understand that a previously unknown group, it is calling itself Al-Qaeda's Jihad in Europe, is claiming responsibility for the explosions. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a little bit too early to speculate about that claim. What I can say with some certainty is that this multi-seated and coordinated attack is very much of the Al-Qaeda signature. So it wouldn't surprise me if it did turn out to be valid, but at this time, as I've said, it's very early to say.
Does it raise questions, in your view, about the quality of intelligence which is being used by the security forces in and around the capital at the moment?
Well, I mean, clearly this can be regarded as, and will be regarded as, an intelligence failure, and there will be a concerted effort, I imagine, to look at all the evidence that emerges subsequent to this to see if anything could have been done. But I have to say, I think it's actually in the nature of intelligence that it isn't perfect. MI5 are charged with our domestic security in this country, but they're dealing with a diverse and difficult threat, and it is in the nature of intelligence that it can fail.
How many suspects do you estimate police should or would be monitoring at the moment?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, clearly each of these devices would have been placed by at least one individual, if not 2 individuals, but then there would have been a larger, as it were, logistic train, a support group that would have helped them to do their work this morning. How many that would actually be is hard to say. One could talk about 15 or 20 who are directly engaged, maybe a larger number, less directly so.
Dr. Brighton, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Well, for more insight into the kind of groups which might be responsible for today's attacks, we're joined in the studio by our Middle East correspondent, Julian Mannion. Julian, you've been studying that website for us this afternoon. questions about its authenticity. What's your view?
Everybody is raising these questions, and it's right that the question should be raised. But on the other hand, the pattern of events, as all the speakers have been pointing out, does invite a particular kind of speculation. And that speculation at the moment has to lead us somewhere near the conclusion that this was a highly coordinated terrorist attack of the specific kind mounted by the group loosely known as Al-Qaeda, which has got, of course, its tentacles now throughout the Islamic world, and has carried out a series of similar style attacks in the recent past. The most spectacular, of course, being the Madrid train bomb, once again an attack against transport infrastructure with an absolute disregard. In fact, one could almost say specifically targeting civilians and trying to inflict the maximum number of casualties possible for political ends. And that, I'm afraid to say, has to be the top of the list as far as speculation about this particular tragedy is concerned.
It's an organisation which has been perhaps rejuvenated by the conflict in Iraq. What do we know about its size and its state?
We know very, very little about it. Frankly, we don't even know if its members really call themselves Al-Qaeda. This particular statement, for example, we have the secret group of Al-Qaeda, Al-Jihad in Europe. It's masqueraded under many different names, and in Iraq, for example, there's a group which calls itself Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and today, for example, they've claimed responsibility for murdering the Egyptian ambassador who was kidnapped a couple of days ago. But we don't really know whether among themselves they really call themselves these names, or whether these are just smokescreens designed to protect much more deeply rooted organizations. What we can say with certainty is that the tentacles of these groups stretch not only in Iraq, but right across Europe. That, for example, in the recent past, sympathizers of, let's call them these jihadist organizations, have organized the transport of volunteers from various European countries, including Britain, to Iraq in order to carry out suicide bombings. Now we know that at the same time, the traffic was working in the other direction, that as they said after the attack on Madrid, sticking to this line of speculation, as they said after Madrid, Britain was also on the list, and it may well be that they've carried out their threat.
What of its tentacles in Britain? What about the cells operating here? Where have they been trained?
Well, you see, I don't think... it used to be a question of people going to Afghanistan. This was before the fall of the Taliban, and there is what is now a very well-documented period in which people were actually trained in camps in Afghanistan. It may well be that the older leaders of the group are of that stock. Today, it's much less clear. Clearly, there is a great deal of international traffic, shall I say, of militants moving in one direction or another. They contact each other not only over the internet, but obviously in secret meetings in person. It may be that some of them have actually fought in Iraq. Others are maybe Saudis coming out of Saudi Arabia. And of course, Britain has particular historic links with Islamic communities in, for example, Pakistan and even the Pakistan-Afghan border. And I think that if we're to pursue what remains a line of speculation, the trail of this particular series may well lead back to the Afghan-Pakistan border, which we know is a hotbed of insurgency and still has the ability, or the groups there have the ability to train terrorists and put them in contact with other groups in, for example, Europe. But to say where are people trained, I'm afraid some of this maybe one would have to call on-the-job training. It's more how they're inspired, I think, these days than specifically how they're trained.
Talking of inspiration, what of that talismanic figurehead Osama bin Laden?
Well, he appears to be still alive. I say appears because he hasn't spoken himself for quite some time, but it's accepted by most security authorities in the United States that Osama bin Laden is still alive, as is his number two, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who did release a statement quite recently, calling, of course, for this continuation of the jihad against the Crusader states, amongst whom we are unfortunately implicated as far as they're concerned. But one must say that I don't think that an order any longer is given in a cave in Afghanistan to attack the London Underground system. This is an organisation which has mushroomed, it has spread, it has, I'm sad to say, acquired sympathisers and followers in a string of European countries and North Africa, and of course throughout the Arab world. And one of the reasons it's had this success in a low level but still potent level of recruitment, we're not saying that all Arabs, all Islamists want to do this, far from it, but they have managed to build a core in these countries. And one of the main reasons for that, I'm afraid to say, is the continuation of the war in Iraq.
Julian, thank you very much.
Right, well, let's speak to our international editor, Bill Neely, who this morning, when the attacks happened, was with the G8 summit at Gleneagles. He's been making his way down to London. We'll move on to terrorism issues, Bill, in just a moment. But first, you, like many people, is caught up in the chaos that, nearly 8 hours after the first explosion, still rings London.
Yes, I think the ripple effect is being seen here. I've just come from Heathrow, and the main motorway west past Heathrow and into London is absolutely chock-a-block. Traffic jams, it seems, going on for miles. The other interesting thing is the presence of many anti-terrorist police at Heathrow Airport, much more visible than normal, all carrying weapons, all on high alert, because nobody knows whether it's over. There may be other attacks to come. We simply don't know. But the police at the highest alert level at Heathrow, and the traffic going into London is, as I said, absolutely jammed.
And of course, we've established throughout the day, by what the police are telling us and others, that the level of alert was not raised over the last couple of days, given the G8.
No, and I suppose many people might find that surprising, given the gathering of the world's most powerful men at Gleneagles. But we have to, we all put our trust in MI5 and the anti-terrorist police in Scotland Yard. They know what they're doing. The interesting thing, of course, is that there was no whisper, as far as we know, that anything was about to happen. There was no hint of an increase of chatter on Islamist websites. Nothing of that kind. And just to add to what Julian Mannion was saying, and the terrorism expert you had on before him, I mean, what struck me almost immediately was how similar this was to the Madrid attack, which I covered last year. Almost exactly the same timing, just before 9 o'clock in the morning, when the trains are packed, when the rush hour is in full swing. At Madrid was 10 bombs on 4 trains. The bombs were left in rucksacks. It was a well-planned, well-coordinated attack, simultaneous explosions, just like London. Mass casualties, the aim, and there was nothing random about Madrid, and obviously nothing random about this attack, particularly when you think of the timing. We've referred to it all during the day, but it sent out so many messages, if you like, from the terrorists' point of view. Number one, obviously it was an attack on the capital city of this country, which has been involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It happened the day after the world's eyes, indeed the day the world's eyes, if you like, was on London after the Olympic decision. But it also sent a message from the terrorist point of view to the leaders meeting in the UK that they were sending that message through the capital, London. So nothing random about anything to do with this. The actual timing of the attack in terms of the rush hour just before 9 o'clock, just like Madrid, and in terms of sending a message. And, you know, these groups, as Julian Mannion said, I think we have to assume that this was a branch of, or people inspired by, Al-Qaeda. There is an organization that calls itself Al-Qaeda in Europe, and they would have taken the template, first of all, of September the 11th, which was coordinated, simultaneous attacks. It was repeated exactly 2.5 years later, on March the 11th in Madrid, and now London has had the same thing visited upon it.
And Bill, to continue the comparison with Madrid, at the moment, obviously, there are 2 key parts to the operation being carried out by the emergency services now. One, of course, is the evacuation plan to look after all those who've been injured, to make sure that there aren't any other devices around ready to go off. But the other will be, obviously, forensic teams scouring for clues, just like they did in Madrid, to find out who was responsible and whether it was those who say they did it at this stage.
That's right. I mean, almost from the beginning of any of these incidents, and we remember back to the crash of the plane at Lockerbie, how a jigsaw was built up right from the moment the first officer basically got on the scene. As you say, it's coping with the injured, removing the dead, and then gathering the debris, the evidence that might catch the guilty person. And at Madrid, indeed, the Spanish police did a very, very good job of finding, well, they had a stroke of luck because one of the bombs didn't go off. One of the mobile phones that was used to detonate the bomb was found. the SIM card was traced from that by the police, and the cell that had been involved in those attacks was traced to an apartment building outside Madrid, and there was a huge standoff and a shootout, and many of the people who we assume were involved in the Madrid attacks were caught. And, you know, the Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist police will be doing exactly the same thing. They will be looking for every possible piece of evidence. So now we don't know as yet whether these attacks were carried out by suicide bombers. I suppose, above all, the one on the bus would suggest that, but it's just as likely that a rucksack, a backpack, something relatively small could have been left underneath a seat on the bus as well. But one way or another, all those, the trains and the bus will be scoured by anti-terrorist detectives looking for the least clue as to who did this. And the other aspect, of course, that MI5 will be doing is MI6 as well, is looking through these Islamist websites. The Foreign Office, the last time I spoke to them, said that they still hadn't found anything on an Islamist website that would suggest with any certainty a group that had done this, and there hasn't so far officially been any claim of responsibility.
Bill, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. That's Bill Neely, our international editor.
Well, news just reaching us here at ITV News that the Union Jack flying over Buckingham Palace has been lowered to half-mast at the Queen's request today in a mark of respect for the dead and injured in the London bombings. That announcement coming to us from Buckingham Palace. So, a reminder of today's main events. 4 explosions have targeted commuters in London at peak rush hour on both mainline underground stations and a double-decker bus.
Police have confirmed at least 33 people have been killed in the explosions.
All the confirmed dead died during the explosions in the underground.
An explosion also ripped through a bus at Tavistock Square. Police say people were killed in that blast, but don't know how many.
The highest number of deaths, 21, were on an underground train travelling from King's Cross to Russell Square stations.
7 people were killed by the explosion in a tunnel near Liverpool Street.
And 5 people died at Edgware Road in North London.
Police say they received no warning before the attacks. A previously unknown group has claimed responsibility.
Tony Blair has described the explosions as barbaric. The Prime Minister has now returned to London from the G8 summit at Gleneagles.
And a special emergency number has been issued for people worried about relatives. It is 0870 1566 344. That's 0870 1566 344. Police are warning the public to be vigilant and have said they cannot be sure it is all over yet.
Well, Romilly Weeks is at Edgware Road, where one of the explosions happened. Romilly, police told us 3 trains were involved in this attack. What else do we know?
Well, we are starting to get a slightly clearer picture of what went on underground here at Edgware Road at around 9:17 this morning. Yes, as you say, a total of 3 trains involved because the device was on one, but another train was passing at the same time, and the device was so powerful that it actually exploded through the tunnel wall. So 3 trains in total affected. Structural engineers are now working on the track below us here. They say there is structural damage, so there's no question of this tube station being opened anytime soon. Forensic scientists have also come here from Fort Holsted military base in Kent. Of course, it is a crime scene, so they're collecting all the evidence they possibly can from the tracks. We do have 5 confirmed fatalities from this one incident, although one emergency worker who I spoke to said he thought there could be double that figure, and he described to me the scene that confronted rescue workers underground, saying it was like a picture of hell, that one carriage was almost completely disintegrated and they were having to pick up bodies strewn along the track. If we just show you the scene here now, Edgware Road has reopened. As you can see, traffic is passing along this major artery in London. But this morning when we first arrived, this 6-lane road had been turned into what looked like a parking lot for emergency vehicles, with fire engines and ambulances parked 6 deep. The Hilton Hotel, which is the big building just beyond the flyover there, was turned into impromptu emergency treatment centre. Around 60 people, 60 of the walking wounded were treated there, and the most critically injured were taken to St Mary's Hospital, which thankfully is quite nearby. Just one other significant factor I want to show you about this location. We are incredibly close to Paddington Green Police Station, which is the UK's highest security police station. It is where terrorist suspects, including Al-Qaeda suspects, are questioned. Whether that was a significant factor in the choice of this location, we don't know, but of course it must be a possibility.
Romilly, thank you very much indeed.
Well, all day casualties have been taken to London's many hospitals. They've all been on high alert throughout the day. Nick Martin is at the Royal London Hospital. Nick.
Yes, well, the doctors, the nurses and the medical staff, for them the work continues here on what has been a very difficult and testing and emotional day for them. I've been here since about 11 o'clock this morning. We followed many of the walking wounded and more seriously ill patients entering the hospital here, some with severe injuries. It was a distressing sight. Many of the less severely injured have now gone home to, no doubt, their families, thankful to see them alive. I'm joined now by one survivor, Michael Henning, who, Michael, you were on the train, one of the trains which was bombed. What was it like?
It was a very surreal experience. I normally get off at Liverpool Street, and I'd normally get off the train about an hour earlier, but I had a meeting which I needed to go to Tower Hill, so got on a Circle Line train heading towards Aldgate. Seemed quite ordinary. I went to get on the carriage where the bomb had gone off, but fortunately for me it looked busy, so I decided to walk down to the next doors and hop on there. I saw a flash of yellow and lots of what appeared to be silver lines, which turned out to be the glass flying through. And I got knocked off my feet and turned to my left down to the ground. It all went very dark. And for moments there was silence after that.
Just describe the scene after that.
I believe the tunnel lights came on and there was a little bit of light. Our carriage was full of smoke and dust, and there was just absolute panic. There was screaming. We were trying to tell people to calm down, which they eventually did, and most people sat down and sat on the floor, sat on the seats. And then we could hear the screaming coming from the carriage just in front of us, who took the full blast. And there was people trapped, twisted. There's bits of the carriage missing, seats missing, and people covered in blood and no help.
Now you're standing here now, this must be quite surreal. I mean, looking back with some reflection, I mean, it must have been a very strange day indeed.
Strange is certainly one word. I just feel a very, very lucky man. I was nearly on, would have been sort of feet away from where it went off. I was within 10 feet, but fortunately on the next carriage, I just feel very, very lucky. I've seen some terribly injured people today.
Michael Henning, thanks very much for talking to us, and we wish you all the very best. Thanks. Well, just to give you somewhat of an update from the Royal London Hospital, this is the latest information we have. The Trust says it's still treating 75 patients. Most have minor injuries such as superficial cuts. 10 patients are still in a serious condition, 6 are critical. And overall today, it's been a very busy day, more than 200 patients, but the Trust has praised all of its staff for its sterling work in what has been very difficult times.
Nick Martin at Royal London Hospital, thank you.
Well, joining us from our Westminster studio is the Shadow Home Secretary, David Davis. Good evening, Mr. Davis. A chilling admission from the police this evening that they don't know if this is over yet. Not the most reassuring message for Londoners.
No, but it's the most sensible one to give, because we really don't know what the full plan is. And if people started moving around and we had another series of bombs, then that would be a terrible outcome. It's obvious, I mean, from some of what your experts have been saying to you already, that this is a very carefully calculated, evil and calculated action on the part of this organisation, designed to maximise the number of deaths and injuries, designed to maximise the amount of disruption of life in the capital. And so the police are being properly cautious.
Given the fact the G8 summit was taking place, do you think the level of alert in the capital should have been raised? Are you happy that everything that could have been done to prevent this was?
Well, it's a little too early to do the post-mortem on the whole thing, but I mean, what is now evident, but it's easy with hindsight, is that the Al-Qaeda, if that's who it was, picked London as a target at its softest moment, when the attention was all on Gleneagles, when no doubt a great deal of our security effort was quite properly on protecting Gleneagles, and of course when the eyes of the world were on us. And all one can conclude from this, and I'm as much in the dark as you are in many ways, all one can conclude from this is this was a completely unknown cell or a completely unknown set of operatives at work, and we simply didn't know about it. And under those circumstances, this can always happen, and under those circumstances there's very little the security services can do except pick up the pieces afterwards and try and track them down afterwards.
David Davis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, let's take a look at the latest developments this afternoon. At least 33 people have been killed in a coordinated terrorist attack in London. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
Police say there was no warning. A previously unknown group called Al-Qaeda's Jihad in Europe has claimed responsibility for the explosions.
An emergency number has been issued for people worried about relatives. That number is 0870 156634. 0870 156634. Jonathan Wills is at the scene of one of the explosions at King's Cross. Jonathan?
Steve, good evening. I can tell you that some news we've just getting here within the last 5 minutes is that these safety cordons just over my shoulder have been extended at Woburn Place. We heard perhaps that this wasn't all over, and that may be still the case. An unidentified object has been found there. That's about 500 or 600 yards down over my shoulder. Here at Russell Square, what we are seeing is a very different picture from that which greeted us this morning. No longer is this a rescue operation, this is a recovery operation. So any more bodies that actually come out of Russell Square Tube will add to the 33 told. There's certainly no sign at this stage of survivors coming out of here. Very different, as I say, to the picture that we gathered this morning. I've been at King's Cross before making my way down here, but similar in both locations. This morning it was a case of the injured coming out of both of these particular tube stations, and King's Cross at the tube as well there. And a variety of different pictures being set. Initially, the emotions very different as the day has progressed, but when we got there, as I say, this morning, it was a case of blackened faces, shock and horror from those people who came out to speak to us, and it was almost an outpouring that they wanted to speak to us. They wanted to tell us exactly of the horrors that had happened at that particular time and why it had happened. And at that stage, obviously, and to this moment still, we don't know. There was a young mother I spoke to who was afraid that she might never see her baby again. I spoke to then a man who actually talked about the calm that actually descended over the carriages after the initial explosion that they felt, before then leaders came forward, pushed open the glass, kicked the glass in and led the passengers, some up here to Russell Square and others out to King's Cross as well. And still there was this question of why. In addition to that, we were talking to others about what they heard at the particular time, and that was this huge explosion. And initially we were told of a power surge, and they weren't sure when they spoke to me this morning that this was an explosion caused by a bomb. Well, clearly we know that that is different now, and the numbers and the death toll are increasing all the time for that matter. Then throughout the day we've seen a different picture, as well as the rescue services have poured in here and up at King's Cross as well. Initially police and ambulance to take away the injured, but after that we've had other security officers coming in, other rescue services coming in, and hand-picking, because this isn't just a forensic incident as well, this is a criminal investigation, and they're looking now at evidence as well. And we've seen hand-picked bricks coming up by the truckload, which is a meticulous job now. We've heard about the structural damage in these tunnels so far, and that will carry on well into the night as these have been going away. And as I say, this has happened about 500 yards from me underground. Each of these items are having to be dragged up by hand. So that was the picture then. Since then, as I say, this has become a recovery rather than a rescue operation. The ambulances have gone, and now it's a case of waiting and seeing what else is discovered down there. Steve.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Wills there updating us from Russell Square.
Well, our reporter Nazanin Moshiri is at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington for us. She joins us from there now. Nazanin, is the hospital saying much about the number of casualties and injuries that it's dealing with?
Well, due to the proximity of the hospital to the Edgware Road blast, literally 100 yards down the road from here, they received many of the most serious injuries. Now, the latest from the hospital is that there are 6 critically ill people here. Many of those have actually lost limbs, unfortunately. There are 17 people who are seriously injured. Injuries ranging from burns, cuts, head injuries, chest injuries, and there are 13 minor injuries, and most of those people have been released over the afternoon. Now, I have actually spoken to the hospital and they've said they're coping very well. The nurses and doctors obviously been working overtime. They're fully staffed today. It's a very, very world-renowned hospital here at St Mary's. They have about 3,500 staff. They found out about the incident about 40 minutes before people started arriving here. Many of the key staff here received text messages, so they knew about the incident. They set up a special patients liaison room as well as a room to deal with the crisis and the emergency here. We are getting updates throughout the afternoon. We're expecting a statement at 6 o'clock later. But obviously, because of proximity to the Edgware Road blast, we do have some critically ill people here currently being treated by doctors and staff.
Nazanin, thank you very much indeed.
Well, before Nazanin, we heard from Jonathan Wills. He was at Russell Square, scene of one of the blasts. He said that very definitely there was a recovery operation going on there rather than a rescue operation. We can talk now to Geraint Vincent, our correspondent at King's Cross Station. And is it the same story with you, Geraint?
Well, just first, Steve, I just want to tell you that there is a really extraordinary atmosphere here, very eerie. This is King's Cross, you know, a massive great crossroads in the middle of London, a major tube station, a mainline train station, and it's just very quiet. Of course, the whole area has been cordoned off, but there are thousands of people trying to make their way from A to B. And if I just ask the cameraman to move around here, and you can get a look at the number of people who are making their way home, making their way back to the office. But it is still a very quiet atmosphere, even though there are very large numbers of people. People here obviously know that nearly 24 people lost their lives in the murderous events here that took place this morning. In terms of the station itself, well, as we heard earlier, very much the rescue operation has turned to a recovery operation. Earlier on this afternoon, we saw trucks of rubble being taken away from the site. There were priests moving around in front of the station concourse. Now, though, I think this is very much a crime scene. Judging by the number of ambulances, there haven't been any ambulances coming out of here. This is the main thoroughfare out of the crime scene here on Pentonville Road. We haven't seen any for about 2 hours now. So I think, as I say, very much a crime scene now. The police concentrating on who did this and how it was done.
Geraint, we know that the police are saying they don't know if this is over yet. Is that something that the people that you've just shown us, that the people who are milling around the area are aware of or are concerned about? What are they saying to you?
Well, I don't think there is a great deal of concern that further attacks could happen. Certainly that's not the impression that we're getting from the police here. The blast here that took place this morning we think was the second blast of the day after the one at Aldgate Tube. The bomb went off when the train was about a few hundred yards from the station platform. Survivors here that we've spoken to have talked about lots and lots of smoke, fire, people being burnt and trying to smash their way out of the windows of the tube carriages with whatever they had to hand. High-heeled shoes, in one instance. Just sounds like an absolutely hellish situation in which 21 people so far have lost their lives.
OK, Geraint, thank you. Geraint Vincent there updating us from King's Cross Station.
Our reporter Emma Walden is at the QE2 Conference Centre in Westminster now, where the emergency services recently held a news conference. Emma.
Well, Layla, that conference began by a confirmation of the timetable of exactly what happened this morning. They said that at 8:51 there was an explosion on the Central Line in the Liverpool Street, Aldgate East area. 7 confirmed fatalities there. At 8:56, between King's Cross and Russell Square, another explosion, 21 people killed in that explosion. At 9:17, a Circle Line train between Edgware Road and Paddington was also subject to an explosion. That involved 3 trains because it actually blew a hole through a wall into another train. There were 5 fatalities there, so that brings a total of 33 fatalities on the tubes. Then at 9:47 there was another explosion on that bus at Upper Woburn Square, the corner with Tavistock Place. At the moment they're not confirming how many, but people definitely did die in that incident. It was the number 30 bus travelling from Hackney to Marble Arch. Well, all the emergency services involved in the operations this morning were represented here today. London Ambulance Service confirmed that they treated 45 patients with serious or critical injuries. That included burns, amputations, chest and blast injuries, obviously because of the explosions, and fractured limbs. In all, 300 minor injuries were also treated. 100 ambulances were involved with 250 staff, and they're asking people not to call 999 unless something is happening which is life-threatening at the moment, so that they can cope with what's continuing to happen. London Fire Brigade said that their officers witnessed some horrific, harrowing scenes and performed magnificently in the face of that challenge. Well, I'm joined now by DAC Brian Paddock from the Metropolitan Police, who obviously have been a key part in this whole operation. DAC Paddock, thanks for joining us. Obviously, the London Emergency Plan has been in place, and this is what it's there for.
Absolutely. We have rehearsed with the police forces across London, British Transport Police, City of London Police, the Fire Brigade, the Ambulance Service and all the other agencies for exactly this sort of scenario. And whilst it came as a shock to us today, it wasn't a surprise, and we put the plan into place, we put it in very quickly, and it has run exactly as we would want it to.
What sort of numbers of officers were involved, and has it been a problem because some have obviously been up at the G8 summit?
We sent 1,500 officers up to the G8 summit from London. We have 31,000 police officers in London. So we've had more than enough police officers to cope with this emergency, and we will have enough officers to cope with members of the public's 999 calls to the police, both during today and into tomorrow.
Now, people have sort of talked about the fact that the security status was actually lowered about a month ago to the 2nd highest level. In light of the G8 summit, in light of London winning the Olympics yesterday, was that the right thing to do? Should we have been on the highest alert?
Clearly we review the state of alert on a daily basis. Whenever any intelligence comes in of any nature, from the security services, from foreign governments, wherever it comes from, we take that into account. And on the basis of the intelligence that we had at the time, we believe the security status, the security alert state, just before these incidents happens, was the right one.
London Underground's Tim O'Toole confirmed today that obviously it'll take some time to get back to normal. Those scenes of those explosions now been treated as a crime scene?
Absolutely. We've had considerable success in the past with Irish Republican terrorism, where we've had explosions in London. And the forensic work that our scientists have been able to do have led to the conviction of people for terrorism. And clearly we will make every effort we possibly can to bring the perpetrators of these horrible crimes to justice.
What sort of officers have been involved, and what will they be doing from now on and this afternoon and into this evening?
We have a whole range of officers. We have experienced detectives working on the investigation, looking at the forensic evidence, looking at closed-circuit television evidence. We will have uniformed officers on patrol in and around the transport network, on the streets of London, to reassure the public. Everybody in the Metropolitan Police Service will be putting their effort into making sure London is as safe as possible.
You talked there about numbers of officers before. Have you had to pull people in, off-duty officers, people from elsewhere, or have you coped?
We were able to cope with the numbers of officers that we had on duty today. Although this has been a terrible, terrible tragedy for those involved, and our hearts go out to the friends and family of those caught up in these incidents. But they have been in fairly restricted areas of London, pretty limited geographic areas. And we have, as I say, sufficient officers to maintain the safety and security of the capital despite these incidents taking place.
British Transport Police did confirm there was a bomb scare at Victoria earlier. That obviously the general public are going to be scared at the moment. What are you saying at the moment about whether this is over?
Well, clearly it would be foolhardy for anybody to say that we've had our attack and it's all over. Yes, you could look at Madrid. That was a one-off incident, a series of bombs during a limited time, and there hasn't been anything else. But we would be stupid to work on that basis. So what we're saying is we will be doing our part. London Transport will be doing their part, searching trains, searching buses. No bus, no train will go into service unless we are absolutely convinced they are safe. And what we need to do is for Londoners to work with us, to keep vigilant, to look out for suspect packages, to look out for people who are behaving suspiciously, and not to hesitate to call us if they see something suspicious.
DIC Paddock, thank you very much. There is an emergency number that anybody concerned about friends and family can call. That Bureau hotline is 0870 1566 344, and British Transport Police are asking people travelling home from work within the next couple of hours to try and stagger their journeys, because obviously there'll be a lot of people trying to get home without the public transport that they'd normally travel on.
Emma Walden, thank you.
And as well, Emma was speaking to Mr. Paddock there. It's just been announced that the Union flag will be flown at half-mast on all government buildings tomorrow. That from a spokesman for the Department of Culture. Of course, the Union flag is already being flown at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. That on the special request from the Queen in respect of those who've lost their lives today.
Well, it's 5 o'clock. You're watching a special programme on ITV1 and the ITV News channel on the day that terrorists brought carnage to London. A series of explosions ripped through the city at peak rush hour. Police are treating it as a terrorist incident and say it will take time for things to get back to normal.
4 bomb blasts in a 60-minute period have killed at least 33 people. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
Hundreds of people have been injured, 45 seriously hurt. Hospitals across the city have been inundated with casualties.
There appeared to be no warning or intelligence. London has been left at a standstill with the entire tube network closed down.
It has brought travel chaos, although some bus services are now running. Police have warned people not to make unnecessary journeys into London and to be vigilant.
Many people in London are having to make their way home on foot this evening.
And there is deadlock on the M4 and other roads into the city, with the RAC warning of long delays.
So let's look back at today's main events. Police have now confirmed at least 33 people have been killed in the explosions. Hundreds more were injured.
All the confirmed dead died during the explosions in the underground.
An explosion also ripped through a bus at Tavistock Square. Police say people were killed in that blast, but they don't know how many yet.
The highest number of deaths, 21, were on an underground train travelling from King's Cross to Russell Square stations.
7 people were killed by the explosion in a tunnel near Liverpool Street.
And 5 people died at Edgware Road in North London.
Police say they received no warning before the attacks. A previously unknown group called the Secret Organisation of Al-Qaeda in Europe has claimed responsibility.
Tony Blair has described the explosions as barbaric. The flag on Buckingham Palace is tonight at half-mast.
And a special emergency number has been issued for people worried about their relatives. It is 0870 1566 344. That is 0870 1566 344.
Police are warning the public to be vigilant and have said they can't be sure it is all over yet. Damon Green now looks at a day of carnage.
The number 30 bus from Hackney to Marble Arch, a Piccadilly line train from King's Cross station, a commuter service between Liverpool Street and Aldgate, and a crowded platform at Edgware Road. Dozens have died, hundreds more have been wounded. In the last few hours, police describe just how it happened.
At 8:51 this morning, there was an incident at Moorgate, around Moorgate, Liverpool Street, Aldgate East underground stations. Confirmed explosion 100 yards into the tunnel from Liverpool Street station. It was believed that the train involved is either a central or a circle line train, and there are 7 confirmed fatalities in that incident.
I work behind the building on the first floor, and there was a big shake. The building shook, so we're like, what the hell's going on? We went to the side of the building, we look out the window, and we see black smoke billowing out of Aldgate Station. So I went outside, and I went to the front, you see black smoke billowing out the front of the station as well. People are coming out, and they're covered in grease, they're covered in soot, and some people coming out covered in blood.
At 8:56 this morning, at the King's Cross Russell Square incident, again, 21 confirmed fatalities in that particular incident.
There's flashes of light on the side of the tube carriage. Smoke immediately billowed into the carriage. It filled it. People started to scream because there was a burning smell, and everyone, to cut a long story short, thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers, praying to God, panicking, breaking the carriage windows with their bare hands, anything to get oxygen into the carriage, because more people tried, the more distressed they became.
At 9:17, there was an explosion on a train coming into Edgware Road underground station, which blew a hole through a wall onto another train in an adjoining platform. In fact, it's believed that 3 trains were involved in that particular incident, and so far there are 5 fatalities in that particular incident.
People panicking, and then people started to calm down. People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
And then at 9:47, there was an explosion on a bus at Upper Woburn Square, junction with Tavistock Place. There are fatalities in that incident, but at the moment we cannot confirm the numbers.
I heard the bang, looked down, saw a cloud of grey smoke, and then later on found out that it was the bus that went off outside the building.
How much damage was there to the bus?
Splintered like an old can. Top deck, just the seats exposed.
No one can be sure yet who's to blame, but the priority for emergency crews is still to care for those whose lives can be saved. Damon Green, ITV News.
The police had always warned it was a matter of when, not if. On a day Britain apparently became the target of Al-Qaeda, we can now look at how events unfolded. Shortly before 10 to 9, at the height of rush hour, a blast hit a train in a tunnel just 100 yards away from Liverpool Street Station in London's financial district. 7 people were killed. 5 minutes later, an explosion hit a train between King's Cross and Russell Square. 21 people died there. And then, less than half an hour later, 3 trains were involved in a blast at Edgware Road Tube. It was reported that passengers on one train tried to smash the windows with umbrellas in a desperate attempt to escape. 5 more people have been confirmed dead. At 9:47, a bomb ripped through a bus near Russell Square. It's not known how many people were killed. Well, with trains and buses suspended and public transport at a standstill, the advice to people in London is to stay where they are and avoid travelling wherever possible.
Well, hospitals across the capital have been inundated with casualties, some serious, some walking wounded. Chris Shipp has this report.
Right across central London, at each of the main trauma units, the injured were brought in, one after the other. The most seriously injured by stretcher. Emergency staff tested to the limit as they rushed to treat the wounded. Ambulance after ambulance pulling up to accident and emergency. Some of the injured able to walk, their clothes torn and stained with blood. Every one of the capital's hospitals on major incident alert. Ambulances queuing to gain access. The casualties kept coming in. But so did the doctors, nurses and surgeons, all reporting for work as the well-rehearsed emergency plans swung into action. And others were brought in by bus, London's famous red double-deckers ferrying some of the hundreds of walking wounded in for treatment. The same transport system which was so ruthlessly targeted, still able to play its part, and every patient with their own horrific story to tell.
We just pulled out of Edgware Road, and next thing I know, there's a large flash of light. Felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face. Was on the floor by that point. Yeah, I can't recall anything prior to that, any noise, any bang. And as soon as I realised, there'd been an accident, got up, had a look around, saw where the exits were. The train was a complete standstill, the lights were out, a lot of smoke in the carriage.
All the windows in the middle of the train smashed and all the glass came, tumbling through. Lights went out, obviously, pitch black, couldn't see, couldn't breathe, everyone was coughing. And
what was the mood like in the carriage?
Well, at that point, everyone thought, oh my God, this is some kind of disaster movie, we're not going to get out, we're all going to die. And so there were lots of screams and people crying.
Above the busiest hospitals, air ambulances hovered waiting for a spot to land as they lifted the most seriously ill into hospital. And throughout the day, blood transfusion vans have been screaming across London. Stocks are said to be good, although the National Blood Service has urged people to keep their appointments. Chris Shipp, ITV News.
Right, let's cross live now to our reporter Jonathan Wills at Russell Square. Jonathan.
In the cities of the free world. Steve, well, this recovery zone has had a latest development. That is within the last 10 minutes. Tunnel reconstruction equipment has arrived here to try and assist in the development of what is taking place underneath our feet, about 500 yards from here, where the explosion took place at 9:17 this morning. We've heard that there was structural damage. We saw it with our own eyes with the amount of rubble that was brought out by the rescue workers, both here at Russell Square and up the road at King's Cross as well. And now we have to wait and see what developments are going to take place. It was initially a rescue site, as we saw the ambulances arrive this morning between 10 o'clock and all the way through to midday. After that, we saw the rescue services as well develop as fire engines came along. And also we obviously heard the eyewitness accounts of exactly the force of this explosion that took place in between the three tunnels for those people, those 21 who died initially, and the many hundreds who have been injured. And the figure hasn't been put on that, but the numbers that we saw clearly that there's hundreds, and there may still be a further rise in the death toll, which stands at, as I say, at 21 as far as this tube explosion is concerned, but 33 in total, and we do, I'm afraid, expect that to rise as well. But the latest development, as I say, here is that the tunnel equipment has arrived to try and assess the extent of the damage. But in addition to that, we've also heard that the accident cordons that are here at the moment behind us have also been extended, because we have heard unconfirmed reports of another unexploded package which has been found in another bus just at the bottom of Woburn Place. That's unconfirmed, I have to say, but in addition to that, we've also heard that these security cordons are likely to be left in place for at least the next 2 days as well. So there will be a vast amount of forensic work going on here to assess not only the extent of the damage, but also gathering evidence. Steve.
Jonathan Wills, thank you.
Well, let's cross live now to our correspondent Dan Rivers, who's at Scotland Yard. Dan, some serious questions being asked there. We've heard reports that there were no high levels of chatter, that there were no warnings phoned in, and that we know that we weren't on the highest level of security alert.
Absolutely. I know that will be the subject of a discussion that is going to happen very shortly with the Prime Minister. He apparently is due here at Scotland Yard in the near future. The Home Secretary, Charles Clarke, is already here. I understand both of them are meeting the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Ian Blair, and clearly they will want a full and thorough brief on exactly what chatter there was, what intelligence there was leading up to these attacks. We are told there weren't any warnings at all, although there was this persistent rumour this morning of some sort of phone call to the Israeli embassy. That seems to have been played down in today's press conference, but I just talked to another senior policeman a few minutes ago. He said it's going to be at least 48 hours before they can even identify the type of explosive used in these attacks, and it may be longer before they can tell whether there was a suicide bomber or suicide bombers involved in these attacks.
Now, Dan, the London emergency plan went into action today. Obviously, they will evaluate how successful that was. What's the word from there at the moment?
I think they were very pleased with the rapid response. It has been rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. It's been drilled into them for a number of months now, exactly what they would do, the kind of locking down of London, the immediate reaction, the getting the resources in and getting the injured to hospital. I think that all went pretty much to plan. One of the policemen I was talking to said that the tsunami had actually helped in that happened on Boxing Day, and they obviously sent over policemen for that, and that helped with afterwards there was a sort of bit of a debrief into the tsunami, and they slightly changed their procedures so they could get hold of people who were off duty and had a much better response, and they really benefited, he said, today from those tweak in the procedures since the tsunami.
OK, Dan Rivers at Scotland Yard for now. Thank you very much.
Let's take a look at the evening's latest developments. At least 33 people have been killed in a coordinated terrorist attack in London. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
Well, police say that there was no warning. A previously unknown group called Al-Qaeda's Jihad in Europe has claimed responsibility for the explosions.
An emergency number has been issued for people worried about their relatives. That number is 08701566344. 08701566344.
Well, joining me now is Crispin Black from our Millbank studio, a defence analyst for the Risk Advisory Group. Mr. Black, it does seem extraordinary given the fact that the G8 meeting was being held at the moment and that the London won the Olympic bid yesterday, that we were on the second highest level of alert.
I agree. It does seem extraordinary. The alert level was reduced in early June, I think the 2nd of June, from severe, general, other words, to substantial. Now, these deliberations aren't in the open and there are no minutes published like the sort of interest rate committee publishes minutes. So we're not quite sure why the threat was reduced, but clearly our analytical thrust was completely in the wrong direction.
I suppose that the question has to be asked, no matter what level of alert we're on, would it have actually made any difference? Would it have stopped either suicide bombers or terrorists from putting bombs onto the tubes and bus?
Well, we don't know, and I think it's very important that you know, at this time we concentrate and remember that the responsibility for these attacks lies with the terrorists, not by any mistake or difficult piece of analysis that the British government may or may not have done. The murders were carried out by terrorists. They're the people responsible for it. But nevertheless, I think it's fair that in the aftermath we should ask some difficult questions. And one of them may well be, how can we reorganise our alert system so that it has better fidelity? And if you have an alert system which people trust, then I think you've got a better chance of everybody being on daily alert in their daily lives, and you've got a better chance, perhaps, of thwarting some of these incidents.
Now, Mr. Black, we know that the police say that there is no one left trapped underground, that the emergency services have taken all the injured to hospital, and we believe that all the dead bodies have been removed. So now really it is the time to search for evidence. I believe that will be a painstaking process. It may well be that some of the evidence that's found here could lead to the perpetrators of this attack.
Absolutely, and I think it's been a hideous day for all of us. We're all Londoners as well. But once terrorists come above the parapet and attack in this way, they have to move slightly more in the open. They might have excited the suspicions of the authorities or the suspicions of other members of their communities. And when they carry out murders with bombs and things like this, you've got fixed in time and space a forensic crime scene that the experts, I mean the world-class experts at Scotland Yard, have a good chance of unearthing some kind of lead from this that should lead them over time to the perpetrators.
Okay, Mr. Black from Millbank, thank you very much for joining us.
We just received some pictures here at ITV News, the latest pictures from Russell Square. Jonathan Wills, our reporter there, was explaining that he'd just seen some heavy equipment going into the underground station. The underground station is there on your left-hand side, and the heavy equipment is drawn up outside. We think they're taking that inside to shore up the tunnel so they can begin investigations in there.
Yes, we were told earlier on, I think in the press conference, that there was structural damage at the tube station there, and so obviously it's a tube station that won't be able to be opened anytime soon, I think were the words that were used. And so, as well as the obviously vital job now of searching for clues, searching for evidence, there also comes the idea of repairing the structural damage that's been done by the blast today. Well, we can now go to Emma Walden. She is at the QE2 Conference Centre in Westminster, where the emergency services held that news conference recently. Emma. Emma, are you hearing us? Emma, can you give us the latest from there?
Absolutely. All the emergency services were represented here today. That's from the British Transport Police, the Metropolitan Police, London Fire Brigade, the London Underground and Transport for London, who obviously have been heavily involved today, and also from London Ambulance Service. And I'm joined now by Larry Perkin, a motorbike paramedic who was actually first on the scene at Liverpool Street this morning. Larry, what did you see there and what have you been doing today?
When I arrived at Liverpool Street, the police and fire brigade were already there. We quickly assessed that there were no casualties presenting to us at Liverpool Street, so we were redirected to Aldgate, where there were a number of casualties.
The incident actually happened between those stations, and it was Aldgate East that the problem was at and where you were most useful.
That's correct, yes. When I arrived, there were already some ambulances there. The fire brigade and the police were already there, and the walking wounded were starting to come out of the station.
What sort of things were you seeing and how were people reacting, and what could you do to help at that point?
And the main thing I noticed that everybody was very calm. They were following instructions. People were coming out with cuts from flying glass and burn injuries, soot over their faces, people having difficulty in breathing because they'd breathed in a lot of smoke. And then the more serious casualties started being brought to the surface.
It must have been a pretty horrific thing for anybody to deal with. You guys deal with this all the time, but nothing on this scale.
It's certainly, we don't normally have that number of serious casualties in one place at the same time, that's for sure.
You're well prepared though?
Yes, as with all the other emergency services, we have been gearing ourselves up for this kind of thing following 9/11 and the other terrorist incidents that may have occurred. And we are well trained for it, and we have a plan that swings into action.
You were then diverted again. Tell me about that.
Once we'd cleared all the casualties at Aldgate, I was sent on to Russell Street, where the incident there was still ongoing.
That was the more serious. We've already learned that 21 people died in that incident. Just describe for me what was happening there and how you dealt with it.
When I arrived, there were already a number of ambulances on scene, and the incident was already being controlled by our officers and management teams. The other emergency services were there, but we still had casualties being brought out. We had serious casualties being brought up from the train, and we had still a large number of walking wounded to be triaged.
How were people generally, just in utter shock?
Yeah, I mean, obviously people were dazed, but as I pointed out, at Aldgate, people were very calm. They were following instructions, and that really helped us with our job.
Were you surprised by how calm people were?
I was, yes. As I said, that helped a lot. Obviously, it's a shocking thing for to happen to anybody on the way to work.
You've dealt with big incidents before. Tell me about that. I mean, did that help?
Certainly, yes. I've attended incidents such as Paddington rail crash and Southall rail crash, and as I say, we have lots of training to deal with these kind of incidents, so you go into your training mode, if you like, and deal with the incident as you should.
The Commissioner from the London Fire Brigade today said he admired his staff immensely for the dealing with these horrific, traumatic scenes in the way they did. Do you see it as that when you're down there, or is it just in a day's job?
Well, something like this is never in a day's job. Obviously, you see some very nasty sights at these kind of incidents, but you deal with each patient as you need to, and you try and prioritise those patients to deal with those with the most life-threatening injuries as early as possible.
What will you be doing now, and will you be sort of recovering yourselves, if you like? Do you receive counselling yourselves after dealing with a major incident like this?
Certainly the London Ambulance Service has a counselling service which has already been offered to us. Counsellors were available. We've already had a hot debrief, if you like, to cover the incident, and the incident will be looked at in depth for lessons learned from how we dealt with it.
Any advice to Londoners tonight that could help you?
As ever, please don't put any extra pressure on the emergency services. At this busy time, I believe we're getting back on track. We were still dealing with the normal calls while we were dealing with this, but as ever, for us and the other emergency services and the hospitals, please think carefully before you utilise us.
Before dialing 999. Thank
Absolutely.
you very much, Larry.
Thank you.
If you are worried and you don't want to call 999, there is an emergency number, Bureau hotline 0870 1566 344. Back to you.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed.
Well, Simon Munday is an expert on motivations behind terrorism. He's from King's College London and is with us in the studio now. And we're just hearing that the American Embassy, or the area around the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square in London, has been sealed off. We know earlier on, obviously, that Buckingham Palace was sealed off. Now, are these just sensible precautions? Can we read anything into this because they're potentially such obvious targets?
Yes, they are potentially obvious targets, and it's very sensible to protect them. Equally, they're such obvious targets that as the fact that the bombs were on the bus and in the train suggests that's probably not what they'll be targeted now, because the terrorists will assume that those are going to be well guarded. If they're not well guarded, well, then that's our fault. But one suspects they are.
OK, well, one of the many things that came up in the news conference this afternoon was put to Mr. Paddock there, whether it was possible that suicide bombers were responsible for the blasts in London today. He said he didn't know. From what you've seen, from the evidence that we can tell so far, what do you think?
Well, from what's gone on so far, it would be surprising if they were suicide bombers, but not at all impossible. There haven't been many examples, in fact, very, very few examples of suicide bombers in Western capitals, and one very much hopes that there are not in the future. There's a different feeling, I think, over here to what suicide actually means and what it means in this context.
But you're suggesting by saying that you think those responsible for this are of European, well, not of European origin, but maybe Europeans or have been living here for some time.
It's very difficult to say anything like that and to draw any conclusions about exactly who did this. You can draw very good conclusions about perhaps why, but not who, and therefore, until you have some idea of exactly the backgrounds of the people who did it, whether they are people who do live here and were trained outside, whether there are people who've come here, whether they are people who are indeed sympathisers from Britain and have been here all their lives. It's quite impossible to say at the moment. It's equally impossible to say, until you really have the evidence of the forensic evidence, whether this was suicide bombing or whether it was indeed a remote-controlled bombing. I would think that just from the feel of it, the number of bombs at the same time, the planning that goes into that, that it would be more likely to be a remote-controlled bombing than a suicide bombing.
OK, for the moment, Simon Munday, thank you.
Well, let's cross now to our political editor, Nick Robinson. He is in Downing Street. Nick, the Prime Minister obviously back in London and due to make a statement.
That's right. What's happened is in the last few minutes, a camera was summoned into Downing Street without reporters. The Prime Minister stood at a podium inside Downing Street in what I'm told is called the Terracotta Room. Now, that tape will be ready for broadcast any minute now. I'm told that the Prime Minister spoke from handwritten notes, that he spoke for 4 or 5 minutes, and that he said that Britain will not be terrorised. He said that our values would not be overturned by these attacks. He went on to thank the emergency services and to particularly single out the Muslim Council of Britain for thanks for their condemnation of these attacks and their support at this difficult time. Now, this came after the Prime Minister had chaired a meeting of what's known as COBRA, that's named after the Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, is essentially just the emergency situation room, in which he then heard from the head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Ian Blair. He had alongside him ministers, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, the Home Secretary Charles Clarke, Pat Hewitt, who's in charge of the Health Service, and heard there about how the situation on the ground was being handled and, of course, about the fears and likelihood of any future attack.
Now, obviously, Mr. Blair left the G8 summit early today when those attacks, when it became clear the scale of the attacks in London. It is a huge blow, though, to what he was hoping to achieve at the G8.
Of course it is. But I have to say, Andrea, I think this is a situation that he's mentally been prepared for ever since September the 11th, 2001. I was at the TUC conference with him in Brighton when he heard that news. I remember his face after he'd heard that news as he dashed here to London to cope. I remember too when he heard just about a year and a half ago, a little less than a year and a half ago, of those Madrid attacks. He was in Dublin then for talks. Now, Jose Maria Aznar, who was then Prime Minister of Spain, George Bush, the President of America, they're not just political allies of his, they are friends as well. He will have talked to them about this situation. He will have talked and learnt from them about how to handle such a situation. He will, in his own mind, have thought through before today how on earth he would handle, how he would react to such a situation. And there has been a sense in the way that he's responded that he had that in mind. A response waiting for news in Gleneagles, not coming out to the cameras within minutes, not even within an hour, waiting to react. Then reacting alongside those leaders of the G8, carefully positioned, I suspect. George Bush on one shoulder, but Jacques Chirac of France, an opponent of the war in Iraq, on his other shoulder, Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, behind him. A message that he said, and they seem to agree by their presence there, came from them all, that an attack on one country was an attack on them all. Then this visit back here to Downing Street to hear for himself exactly what's going on. This address that we'll hear shortly, designed to be heard by all people here and throughout the world who are interested. And then another calculated decision to return to Gleneagles tonight to say, you can't stop London, you can't stop the business of the G8, get on, continue with the work we had to do.
Nick Robinson at Downing Street, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We are now able to go to Tony Blair to hear what he had to say just a few minutes ago in Downing Street.
This has been a most terrible and tragic atrocity that has cost many innocent lives. I've just attended a meeting of the government's emergency committee, received a full report from the ministers and the officials responsible. There will be announcements made in respect of the various services. In particular, we hope the underground, insofar as is possible, and rail and bus services are up and running as swiftly as possible. I would like again to express my profound condolences to the families of the victims and to those who are casualties of this terrorist act. I would also like to thank the emergency services that have been magnificent today in every respect. There will, of course, now be the most intense police and security service action to make sure that we bring those responsible to justice. I would also pay tribute to the stoicism and resilience of the people of London who have responded in a way typical of them. In addition, I welcome the statement that's been put out by the Muslim Council of Great Britain. We know that these people act in the name of Islam, but we also know that the vast and overwhelming majority of Muslims here and abroad are decent and law-abiding people who abhor this act of terrorism every bit as much as we do. It is through terrorism that the people that have committed this terrible act express their values. And it's right at this moment that we demonstrate ours. I think we all know what they're trying to do. They're trying to use the slaughter of innocent people to cow us, to frighten us out of doing the things that we want to do, of trying to stop us going about our business as normal as we're entitled to do. And they should not and they must not succeed. When they try to intimidate us, we will not be intimidated. When they seek to change our country or our way of life by these methods, we will not be changed. When they try to divide our people or weaken our resolve, we will not be divided and our resolve will hold firm. We will show by our spirit and dignity and by a quiet but true strength that there is in the British people, that our values will long outlast theirs. The purpose of terrorism is just that. It is to terrorize people, and we will not be terrorized. I'd like once again to express my sympathy and my sorrow for those families who will be grieving so unexpectedly and tragically tonight. This is a very sad day for the British people, but we will hold true to the British way of life. Thank you.
Well, Tony Blair there may have known in his heart since September the 11th that a terrorist attack in Britain was, if not inevitable, then very likely after the events in Afghanistan and in Iraq. But he certainly looked shaken today in Gleneagles when he made that first speech, and again in Downing Street. He began by talking of his profound condolences to the families of the victims. He thanked the emergency services, and he talked about the stoicism and the resilience of the people of London.
Yeah, he described it as a tragic atrocity, and he said, I think we all know what they are trying, that they are trying to use slaughter of innocent people to cow us and to frighten us. They should not and must not succeed, he said.
Well, now back to our political editor, Nick Robinson, who's outside Downing Street, where Tony Blair made that statement just a few minutes ago. Nick.
Andrew, I was struck as I was hearing the Prime Minister then by the conversation I had when I first began this job as political editor. I spoke to a close advisor of the Prime Minister and said, what do I need to know? He said, what you need to know is the absolutely alarming nature of the warnings that come in day after day across the Prime Minister's desk about what might happen here, about what terrorists want to do. Now, that was almost 3 years ago. I think ever since then, ever since September the 11th, the Prime Minister has lived in his mind with the possibility, the likelihood, perhaps even the inevitability, that there would be a day like this and that he would have to make a statement like the statement that he's just made. As I was saying before we heard his words, he's also, of course, lived through it, through the experiences of Madrid and the experiences of New York and Washington. He's lived through it by talking to his friends George Bush and Jose Maria Aznar, political allies who've gone through similar experiences. So in a sense, that was a speech clearly written in the shock of what he's heard today, but a speech written in his head in recent months and recent years, as he's tried to think, what would we do? How would we react? Today he knows.
Indeed, today is our day. Nick Robinson of Downing Street, thank you very much.
A reminder now of the latest developments this evening. More than 30 commuters have died after 4 explosions in the London rush hour.
Well, police have confirmed at least 33 people have been killed in the blasts. All the confirmed dead died during the explosions in the Underground.
An explosion also ripped through a bus at Tavistock Square. Police say they don't know how many people died in that blast.
The highest number of deaths, 21, were on an Underground train travelling from King's Cross to Russell Square station.
7 people were killed by the explosion in a tunnel near Liverpool Street.
And 5 people died at Edgware Road in northwest London.
Police say they received no warning before the attack. Security experts say it has all the hallmarks of the Al-Qaeda network.
But Tony Blair has described the explosions as a tragic and terrible atrocity.
and a special emergency number has been issued for the people worried about relatives. It is 0870 1566 344. That is 0870 0870 1566 344.
Well, Glenn Goodman is at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington for us now. St Mary's Hospital, Glenn, just not too far away from Edgware Road where one of the explosions took place, claiming 5 lives. I believe a lot of the injured were taken to St Mary's, rather.
That's right. That's right. St Mary's is only a few hundred yards away from Edgware Road Station. The emergency teams here were alerted around about the time that the Edgware Road blast happened. They've got a system of emergency text messages, so they were texted and they were able to prepare their emergency teams for the injured people who were going to come. In fact, it was about 40 minutes before the first injured people arrived here. Obviously, it took the emergency services a while to get people out of Edgware Road Station amongst all the confusion. But once they were here, they started being treated. As I say, that was about 40 minutes after the first texts arrived. In total, 36 people were here by mid-morning. That included 6 people who had critical injuries, 17 people who were seriously injured, and also 13 people who had minor injuries, such as cuts and bruises. Now, those who were seriously injured had injuries such as limb damage, burns, head injuries, also, of course, chest problems, which was a byproduct, obviously, of smoke inhalation. Those who were in a critical condition, some of them had lost limbs. Now, it was suggested at some point that they might be moved to a specialist unit elsewhere, but I've spoken to St Mary's. They say that's not the case, that in fact they have all the facilities that they need here to deal with all the injuries that have been brought to them. The hospital, they say, is coping very well. They've got about 3,500 staff on, they've got 1,500 nurses and around 300 or 400 doctors here. I spoke a short while ago with a lady who'd come in. She was very upset. She'd come in to visit a friend of hers who was injured quite badly in the Edgware Road blast. She said that her friend had serious eye injuries, but nonetheless she was relieved that it looked like her friend was going to pull through, she said. In addition to what's going on here, they've set up an assessment centre which is just down the road, and there they're looking at all the people who've been coming in from Edgware Road. Doctors and nurses are there. They're looking at people, checking them out, and those that they consider need hospital treatment, they've been sending them over here to St Mary's.
OK, Glenn, thank you very much indeed.
We're joined in the studio now by Middle East correspondent Julian Mannion. And Julian, you of course have a long experience of reporting the aftermath of terrorist attacks around the world. What do you deduce from the information that you've managed to gather today?
Well, I think the Prime Minister himself is pointing the finger fairly firmly in the direction where we've been speculating all day. It's, of course, too early to say specifically who did this. But what we seem to be dealing with is an attack by what is commonly known as the Al-Qaeda network. It may be less a network than, if you like, an inspiration for these really horrific deeds, but an action really along the lines of what took place in Madrid on March 11th last year, a deliberate attack on the transport infrastructure, a multi-prong attack to cause the maximum effect with the clear objective of killing and maiming as many civilians as possible. It's as immoral as that.
And then the fact that you point out that it could well be an inspiration, no more, in other words, not a physical group necessarily, makes them even more difficult to defend against, obviously.
Yes, I mean, what the Prime Minister will have at his fingertips, one suspects and indeed hopes, is a great deal more detailed information about the kind of groups that have been attempting to carry out this operation in Britain. It's significant, for example, that the one statement of responsibility we've had today, which may or may not be authentic, but which comes from an organisation which calls itself the secret organisation of Al-Qaeda al-Jihad in Europe, al-Jihad being, of course, the Holy War, that this organisation speaks in glowing terms of the great difficulties that had to be surmounted in order to get people in here to carry out this attack. Now, we don't know whether actually this is an organisation in a formal sense, in that if it takes orders from, let's say, a cave in Afghanistan. I think these days one rather doubts it, bearing in mind the tremendous efforts that the Americans have put in to suppress exactly that sort of activity. I'm talking about Osama bin Laden and his acolytes. What what we are dealing with quite clearly is a cause that shares common goals, a cause that has a common modus operandi, if I can put it this way. Above all, a cause really based on hatred and revenge. It's hatred of what they call the Crusader governments. Unfortunately, our government is identified by them as a Crusader government for its actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the revenge is for what they claim is the killing of Muslims in those countries and the unjustified assault, in their eyes, on Afghanistan and in particular on Iraq, the war that's continuing to this day. So we are really dealing with what we had feared, it seems to me. We're dealing with something which is well implanted, albeit in small numbers, quite likely in somewhere within the Muslim community in this country, just as well as it was implanted inside the Muslim community in Spain and in other countries that have suffered these terrible disasters. I'm not by any means branding the majority or anything like the majority, but somewhere here in this country are cells of people who have been willing to carry out this really ghastly atrocity.
As we're speaking, Julian, Tony Blair has just gone into News Scotland Yard. Are we saying that there are operatives, Al-Qaeda operatives, sleeping in this country, sleeping cells, so-called sleeping cells, or are their movements so difficult to track we don't really know where they are, where they're coming from?
I'm afraid there's one truism about terrorism which must apply in this case. It is not a simple matter, particularly with the security forces doing everything they possibly can to prevent this. It is not a simple matter even to assemble the number of people and the relatively small quantities of explosives that would be needed to carry out this attack and to do it in the coordinated fashion that they appear to have shown today. We are dealing with an international organisation or an international cause, let me put it that way, which has its tentacles somewhere inside Britain.
You, of course, have seen the aftermath of evidence of suicide bombers. Would you say, looking at the pictures we've seen today of the bus, for example, is that consistent with a suicide bomber?
Horrifically, terribly consistent, I'm afraid to say. I mean, when I saw the picture of this bus, you know, I've covered quite a few suicide bus bombings, as they are glibly known in Israel, and it really could have been just a flashback to what I've seen on those occasions. We don't, of course, know. There is some speculation that this particular bomber on the bus may have been carrying the bomb somewhere else, or alternatively that it may have been a bomb that was placed there and then set off by remote control. We simply don't know. What we do know is the effect. The effect is what we've seen in Israel and indeed in other places when this horrific technique, which is aimed, let's call it by its name, it's aimed at murdering the maximum possible number of civilians in the easiest possible way for this deeply cynical and, one must say, wicked group of people.
Because of the kind of groups, the kind of people that you've been describing carrying out these kind of atrocities, it is difficult for the security services to track them, as we've already discussed. But they do that sometimes by the websites, by chatter. Is that what MI5, MI6 will be doing on a daily basis here in this country?
Well, I mean, you can take that as read. The surveillance of websites, and I mean, one rather suspects there's a sort of war, a secret war of the websites going on, to which we're not privy of the real mechanics. But of course, genuine jihadist websites, if I can put it that way, which come and go, which fluctuate, which appear and then disappear, these will be, their activities and their statements will be pursued rigorously by the security services. But beyond that, there will be all sorts of other intelligence gathering mechanisms inside mosques, trying to trace suspicious travellers, really beyond the imagination in terms of its scope. The problem is that to do this, you have to have a bit of local support, you have to have the explosives, but you actually have to have quite a small number of really determined people, and it is very difficult to track these people down until they've carried out this kind of horrific act. If the statement, today's statement by this jihadist group is genuine, they themselves point out how difficult it was. The hope has got to be that in carrying out these dreadful actions, they have left some clues, as indeed took place, for example, in Madrid, where somebody from this group, if this hasn't happened already, can be tracked down, preferably captured, and some clue can be gleaned as to the exact mechanics of how this operation was carried out. But it must be said that even if that happens, as in the case of Madrid, it is unlikely to put a stop to it. This is a cause. They see it as a cause, and it is based, as I say, on revenge for a war that is still going on at this moment, and that is unlikely to come to an end, I'm afraid, anytime soon.
OK, Julian, thanks very much indeed, Julian Lanyon.
OK, for anybody just joining us, let's take a roundup of this evening's main developments. At least 33 people have been killed in a coordinated terrorist attack in London. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
Tony Blair has described the explosions as a terrible atrocity. He promised an intense hunt by the police and security services to bring those responsible for justice.
The explosions have meant that travel chaos is in place tonight for roads around London, including the M4. But some buses are operating again in the city centre.
Damon Green now looks at a day of carnage.
The number 30 bus from Hackney to Marble Arch, a Piccadilly line train from King's Cross station, a commuter service between Liverpool Street and Aldgate, and a crowded platform at Edgware Road. Dozens have died, hundreds more have been wounded. In the last few hours, police describe just how it happened.
At 8:51 this morning, there was an incident at Moorgate, around Moorgate, Liverpool Street, Aldgate East underground stations. Confirmed explosion 100 yards into the tunnel from Liverpool Street station. It was believed that the train involved is either a central or a circle line train, and there are 7 confirmed fatalities in that incident.
I worked behind the building there on the first floor, and there was a big shake. The building shook, so we're like, what the hell's going on? We went to the side of the building, we look out the window, and we see black smoke billowing out of Aldgate Station. So I went outside and I went to the front, and you see black smoke billowing out the front of the station as well. People are coming out, and they're covered in grease, they're covered in soot, and some people coming out covered in blood.
At 8:56 this morning, at the King's Cross Russell Square incident, again, 21 confirmed fatalities in that particular incident.
There's flashes of light on the side of the tube carriage. Smoke immediately billowed into the carriage. It filled it. People started to scream because there was a burning smell, and everyone, to cut a long story short, thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers, praying to God, panicking, breaking the carriage windows with their bare hands, anything to get oxygen into the carriage, because more people tried, the more distressed they became.
At 9:17, there was an explosion on a train coming into Edgware Road underground station, which blew a hole through a wall onto another train in an adjoining platform. In fact, it's believed that 3 trains were involved in that particular incident, and so far there are 5 fatalities in that particular incident.
People panicking, and then people started to calm down. People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
And then at 9:47, there was an explosion on a bus at Upper Woburn Square, junction with Tavistock Place. There are fatalities in that incident, but at the moment we cannot confirm the numbers.
I heard the bang, looked down, saw a cloud of grey smoke, and then later on found out that it was the bus that went off outside the building.
How much damage was there to the bus?
Splintered like an old can. Top deck, just the seats exposed.
No one can be sure yet who's to blame, but the priority for emergency crews is still to care for those whose lives can be saved. Damon Green, ITV News.
Well, we can speak now to the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. He joins us from Westminster. Rudy Giuliani, you were near the scene of one of the blasts. That must have resonated, the experience must have resonated with you more than most of the people in London today.
It sure did. I mean, my profound condolences and sympathies to the people who were victims of this, to them, to their families, and to everyone affected by it. I was at a breakfast right near Liverpool Station when I think it was the first attack took place. The first report that we got was that it was possibly an accident or a device, meaning a bomb. And then when the second happened, it was clear that it was an attack. And as I've been moving about London today, I must say the reaction of the people has been inspiring. I mean, very brave, very determined. The emergency services appear to look like they've done everything they possibly can. It looks very well organized, which I think has helped to contain some of the emotion and some of the fear. And I think the emergency services look like they were prepared for this. I mean, they look like they were prepared not necessarily for this specific attack today, but for an attack like this. And when you have that kind of preparation, you can carry out your assignments, I think, better and save lives and minimize panic.
Mr. Giuliani, you, of course, were Mayor of New York at the time of September the 11th. Many of us here, myself included, went out there to cover the aftermath of those terrible attacks. What you saw today in London, did it remind you of the same kind of stoicism and resilience that we saw in the people of New York after the attack?
Sure it did, and there's a good reason for that. I think the people of New York modeled themselves after the people of London, way back in the 1940s, when we were trying to think of who could we use as an example of how the people of New York should react to the attacks of September 11. The first thing that came to mind were the people of London in 1940. So the minute I heard about this, I can't say that I was surprised by the reaction of the people here. In other words, how they handled it and dealt with it in a resolute way. After all, I mean, their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents went through this, and it appears as if they've inherited the same quality of bravery.
Yes, what would you say to the people of London today? Of course, this city and they have to get through this just like New York and New Yorkers did.
Well, there's no question that what I would say to them is that this brings us even closer, meaning New Yorkers and people from London, Americans and people from Great Britain. We're very, very close anyway. And now we've lived through so much that's similar that I think it creates a really close bond. And we understand and are still living through the great losses that we had, some of which were your citizens. I mean, we lost a lot of people on September 11, as you've lost people today. So our hearts go out to you. Our support for you is just as strong as it's always been, and even greater. And once again, we admire the way in which people of freedom, like the people of London, can deal with things like this. I mean, well, ultimately, we're stronger than these terrorists. And we are overcoming them, and we will overcome them. Unfortunately and tragically, there have to be people who have to pay a very, very unfair price in getting the world to a position where we don't have terrorism any longer.
Now, of course, you've got, unfortunately, a lot of first-hand knowledge about what happens next. I think that people across London, and indeed across the UK, are really only coming to terms this evening with what has actually happened. We all suspected that a terrorist attack might happen one day in London ever since September the 11th. Now that it's happened here, we need to know how to move on. And I think one of the important things is going to be the work that we're already seeing being done, the forensic work, to try and find some piece of evidence that will be able to link this to perhaps an individual's cell, and that we can get some kind of closure by having people arrested. Is that the kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's very, very important to bring these people to justice and have them pay an enormously heavy price for what they did. I mean, part of how you eliminate terrorism ultimately is by deterring it. And you deter it by doing everything you can to stop it in advance. Do everything you can to catch the people who did it. And then, and I think the people of London displayed that starting today, letting them know that they can't put us in chaos. They can't overwhelm us. They can't stop us from going about our normal lives, because ultimately, people who live in freedom have more strength than people who live in oppression.
Because of your experience of 9/11, how important in this process is the response of politicians, the leadership of politicians, Tony Blair specifically?
Well, I think two responses are critical. First, the emergency services, and their response has been superb and excellent today. And the response of the Prime Minister has been equally excellent. He's said exactly the right words. He's came here, put himself right out front, and made it clear how much his heart goes out to the people who have undergone these losses and the support and the love and the caring that they're going to have, but also the fact that he is not going to be deterred by these terrorists, that they're not going to determine government policy. He has always been very strong on that, and today I think he was as strong as anyone could possibly be. I think he's been a very effective leader against terrorism in the past, and today it really showed. I think he said the right things in the right way, and I think that's going to help a lot restore the morale of the people of Britain.
And finally, Mr. Giuliani, many people in New York said that you were an inspiration to them in the days and weeks after the tragedy at the Twin Towers. What would you say to the people of London tonight, having been here on this day when we've had our own terrorist attacks?
Well, I feel some kind of a real connection with the people of London, not just by being here today, which is an eerie coincidence and had me live through a lot of what happened on September 11, but because it gives me a chance to tell the people of London, as I have in the past, how much of an inspiration they were to me on September 11, because of my knowledge of English history and my respect for Winston Churchill, and they were an inspiration that helped me get through when I thought about what we were facing on September 11, the thousands of lives lost and the rebuilding that was necessary. I kept thinking about who went through this, and immediately I thought of the people of London, Winston Churchill, and how they went through far worse than anything we went through on September 11, or far worse than anything we're going to have to go through. And they're really our inspiration, and it's really true that the people today are reacting in exactly the same way, that same brave, resolute way that their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents reacted when they were tested back in 1940.
OK, Mr. Giuliani, former Mayor of New York, in London today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Well, as we approach 6 o'clock, let's recap on today's events. The day terrorists brought carnage to London. A series of explosions ripped through the city at rush hour.
4 bomb blasts in a 60-minute period have killed at least 33 people. 3 tube stations were targeted, as well as a double-decker bus.
Hundreds of people have been injured, 45 seriously hurt. Hospitals across the city have been inundated with casualties.
Well, Tony Blair has condemned it as a terrible atrocity. He has promised an intense hunt to bring those responsible to justice.
There appeared to be no warning or intelligence. London has been left at a standstill with the entire tube network closed down. Police have warned people not to make unnecessary journeys to London.
Well, many people in London are having to make their way home on foot this evening. There's deadlock on the M4 and other roads into the city, and the RAC are warning of long delays. We'll have a special report now with Mark Austin.
Good evening from the heart of London. 24 hours ago, I was standing right here celebrating one of the greatest days in the history of this city. Tonight, we're reporting on one of its darkest, the day London came under terrorist attack.
I need you to move this way, please, as quick as you can.
People started saying prayers, praying to God.
They struck in the rush hour, targeting London's commuters on this bus and on several underground trains. A tactic designed to cause maximum casualties and disruption. It was the deadly attack this city had been dreading.
Dead bodies lay by the side of the tracks. Terrible.
Dozens are dead, hundreds injured. Hospitals were overwhelmed, in some cases giving life-saving treatment in the street.
I felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face.
The Prime Minister rushed from Gleneagles, his G8 summit in ruins, returning to Downing Street and top-level consultations with his security chiefs.
We condemn utterly these barbaric attacks.
So who did it? Tonight, all the evidence points to Al-Qaeda. The attacks caused chaos. All public transport across the capital was brought to a standstill. Hundreds of thousands of people left stranded, shocked and afraid.
Today's coordinated terrorist attacks happened within the space of just 60 minutes in the morning rush hour. There were 3 explosions at busy underground stations, the first at 8:51 a.m. on a train heading from Aldgate East to Liverpool Street Station. At least 7 people are confirmed dead in that attack. Just 5 minutes later, at 8:56 a.m, another blast ripped through the Piccadilly line on a train going from Russell Square to King's Cross. At least 21 people were killed there. At 9:17 a.m, an explosion went off at Edgware Road Station. 5 people are confirmed dead. And just half an hour later, at 9:47, a blast tore apart a number 30 bus here at Tavistock Square. We don't know yet how many died in that explosion. Around 50 people have been seriously injured and more than 300 others treated in hospital for minor injuries. Tonight, London is a city in shock. Our senior correspondent, James Mates, has this report which contains images that may upset you.
Ever since September the 11th, we were told this day was inevitable. Today, all the alerts, the scares, the predictions became a quite appalling reality. Without warning, without provocation, 4 blasts ripped through London's transport system at a time of the morning when the bombers knew the buses and trains would be full almost beyond capacity. 10 to 9 in the morning, a bomb rips through a train between Liverpool Street and Aldgate. Above ground, no one is sure if this is an attack or an accident. There are reports of a crash. Another suggests power surges were to blame. Those on the train knew exactly what it was.
We knew it was a bomb straight away, so just trying not to panic, really.
What were people doing?
We broke the door to our carriage down, and then because there was so much smoking and it was black everywhere, there was no lights, and we just moved people down through the carriages.
So much smoke, and people panicking, and then people started to calm down. People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
The way the emergency services were responding soon told Londoners that this was no ordinary accident. Soon after 9:30, the second explosion, this time at West London's Edgware Road. The bomb was on one tube train, 2 others were caught up in its blast. In their first attack, the bombers had killed 7. At Edgware Road, they took another 5, quite innocent lives, and injured scores more.
We just pulled out of Edgware Road, and next thing I know, there's a large flash of light. Felt a burning sensation on my hands, put my hands up to my face. Was on the floor by that point. Yeah, I can't recall anything prior to that, any noise, any bang. And as soon as I realised, there'd been an accident, got up, had a look around, saw where the exits were. The train was a complete standstill, lights were out, a lot of smoke in the carriage.
Just 7 minutes later, bomb number 3, again deep underground between King's Cross and Russell Square stations. This was to be the deadliest attack of them all. 1 carriage completely wrecked. Inside it, 21 lay dead, with many, many more suffering horrific injuries.
There was a large bang. People were physically ejected out of the chair. There's flashes of light on the side of the tube carriage. Smoke immediately billowed into the carriage. It filled it. People started to scream because it was a burning smell, and everyone, to cut a long story short, thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers, praying to God, panicking, breaking the carriage windows with their bare hands, anything to get oxygen into the carriage, because more people tried, the more distressed they became.
I saw this silver lines across my face, which I believe was the glass, and this yellow flash, and then I was being twisted and thrown to the ground. I had no idea what happened. There was a rushing sound, and there was just total darkness. some light came into our carriage, and then there was a lot of panic, a lot of screams. We had to walk back past all the carnage, and where the explosion happened, it had thrown some people out. Then the damaged carriage was several feet further up where the train had stopped. There was one body under some of the metal sheeting that wasn't moving. He's had his trousers blown off. There was a couple of others who were had their clothes stripped from them as well, but just about moving on the track. And then in the carriage there was people covered in blood and people trying to hold their heads and give them some help.
If anyone now doubted what we were seeing was a coordinated series of terror attacks, confirmation came just 10 minutes later. A number 10 bus passing through Tavistock Square was torn apart by a bomb placed near the back on the upper deck. It was full of people recently evacuated from Russell Square tube station. These amateur pictures show just the empty seats open to the sky.
I can see in front of me a red double-decker bus, the front half of which has been totally blown away. There are paramedics on the scene, there are members of the public, there are police all over, and they're trying to tend the walking wounded. There's bus seats have been thrown out of the bus and onto the street. There are cars all around the bus which have all been damaged.
It must have been the bus behind because it was such a loud explosion. We thought it was coming from, the underground. And then we heard later that a bus exploded, and that's when they made us all evacuate their buses.
Other buses were quickly commandeered by the emergency services to ferry the injured to hospital. The police had rehearsed just this sort of scenario in the heart of the capital. They were prepared and their response showed that.
There is no doubt that this is an attack involving explosives. There's no doubt therefore that it's a terrorist incident, and the message to people in London is to stay where they are for the time being, not to try and move away from anywhere. We've got the scenes under control. We are talking to TfL about producing a bus service. It is extremely unlikely that the tube service will open today. In fact, I can say I'm almost certain that it will not. But the situation is under control and the emergency plan is working.
His commanders are still unsure whether the terrorists were suicide bombers or whether the bus bomber was in fact heading for the underground.
The police service received no warning about these attacks, and the police service has received no claims of responsibility from any group in connection with these attacks. This clearly was a callous attack on purely innocent members of the public, deliberately designed to kill and injure innocent members of the public.
The numbers of dead bear witness to that, but they tell only half the story. The catalogue of horrific injuries speaks of dozens of lives ruined, bodies crippled.
We have treated 45 patients with serious or critical injuries, including burns, amputations, chest and blast injuries, and fractured limbs. We have also treated approximately 300 patients with minor injuries, including lacerations, smoke inhalation, shock, cuts, and bruises.
From the air, the near-total paralysis of a capital city was quite clearly visible. The tube system completely shut down all day. Most of the trains in and out of London cancelled. Buses that had filled the streets in this morning's rush hour now confined to their garages. On the motorways it was so bad people took to the hard shoulder and walked. This would not be unique to London. Any modern capital city could be brought to a standstill through attacks like these. But it does show what the politicians are fighting against when they promise not to allow the bombers to destroy our way of life.
It's important, however, that those engaged in terrorism realise that our determination to defend our values and our way of life is greater than their determination to cause death and destruction to innocent people in a desire to impose extremism on the world. Whatever they do, it is our determination that they will never succeed in destroying what we hold dear in this country and in other civilized nations throughout the world. Thank you.
Hard to believe now, but this time yesterday there can hardly have been a better feeling than to be a citizen of the nation's capital.
Can we dress back, please, unless you want to speak to police?
The flag flying at half-mast above Buckingham Palace was itself testament to the way that one of the happiest days in London's recent history has given way to one of the darkest. James Mates, ITV News.
Well, Scotland Yard has issued an emergency number for people who are worried about friends and relatives to call. It's there, or should be there it is on your screen now, 0870 1566 344. That's 0870 1566 344. Well, as we saw Tony Blair shocked and shaken, heard the news during the G8 summit at Gleneagles. During the afternoon, he travelled back to Downing Street, just behind me here, to be briefed on the day's events. A short time ago, he made this statement.
This has been a most terrible and tragic atrocity that has cost many innocent lives. I've just attended a meeting of the government's emergency committee, received a full report from the ministers and the officials responsible. There will be announcements made in respect of the various services. In particular, we hope the underground, insofar as is possible, and rail and bus services are up and running as swiftly as possible. I would like again to express my profound condolences to the families of the victims and to those who are casualties of this terrorist act. I would also like to thank the emergency services that have been magnificent today in every respect. There will, of course, now be the most intense police and security service action to make sure that we bring those responsible to justice. I would also pay tribute to the stoicism and resilience of the people of London who have responded in a way typical of them. In addition, I welcome the statement that's been put out by the Muslim Council of Great Britain. We know that these people act in the name of Islam, but we also know that the vast and overwhelming majority of Muslims here and abroad are decent and law-abiding people who abhor this act of terrorism every bit as much as we do. It is through terrorism that the people that have committed this terrible act express their values. And it's right at this moment that we demonstrate ours. I think we all know what they're trying to do. They're trying to use the slaughter of innocent people to cow us, to frighten us out of doing the things that we want to do, of trying to stop us going about our business as normal as we're entitled to do. And they should not and they must not succeed. When they try to intimidate us, we will not be intimidated. When they seek to change our country or our way of life by these methods, we will not be changed. When they try to divide our people or weaken our resolve, we will not be divided and our resolve will hold firm. We will show by our spirit and dignity and by a quiet but true strength that there is in the British people, that our values will long outlast theirs. The purpose of terrorism is just that. It is to terrorise people, and we will not be terrorised. I'd like once again to express my sympathy and my sorrow for those families who will be grieving so unexpectedly and tragically tonight. This is a very sad day for the British people, but we will hold true to the British way of life. Thank you.
Tony Blair speaking there at Downing Street within the last hour. Now, London's emergency services and hospitals went onto a full-scale major incident footing, mobilising dozens of ambulances to the scenes of the bomb blasts. At least 700 people have been treated in accident and emergency rooms around the capital. That's a new figure reaching us. And we've just heard also that the death toll has risen to 37. Lauren Taylor's report contains graphic images of the injured.
They survived the blasts, but their injuries were terrible. These were among the first of the victims to be rushed to the Royal London Hospital. One still being worked on inside the ambulance. Several are in critical condition. This was just one of several hospitals on full incident alert, receiving the injured around the capital.
Make sure the road is clear for vehicles, thank you!
Everywhere staff rushed to help as emergency procedures swung into action. It was now about coping not just with large numbers of victims, but the particular injuries caused by the explosions.
The injuries are mostly burn injuries with bony deformities, bony injuries associated with blast. All of that group, I think, also have airway problems in that there are burn injuries to the airways.
For these patients, treatment on the pavement. This is Great Ormond Street Hospital, which has no accident and emergency department, but was one of the closest to the site of one of the explosions. All planned operations were cancelled as staff tended to those who'd been in the terrorists' path. Elsewhere, buses, which had so recently been targets, had become makeshift ambulances. And for several hours, helicopters were used to airlift some victims to hospital and help reach the most seriously wounded at the scene.
Today we mobilised a total of 18 doctors to the incidents that occurred throughout London, where we were able to provide intensive care at the scene of the incident and deal with the injuries that patients had while they were actually trapped in the wreckage of the vehicles and in the tube.
For those who were lucky to come out of hospital quickly, a moment to relive the horror of what happened.
I was on the carriage, there was a huge explosion in my carriage. Smoke filled the place, train stopped, darkness everywhere, people screaming. We were all sort of panicking because of the smoke as well. We didn't know what had happened, so a few of us kicked down one of the doors, and were sort of thinking about jumping down, but we didn't know if the tracks were still alive or not.
So nobody knew what was going on. People were trying to get out of the train as quickly as they could, and people were smashing the doors with their feet, and then I don't know how long we were down there for, but yeah, people were getting their faces absolutely covered in black soot and all onto their noses and everything. And
hospitals have been rehearsing for large-scale terrorist incidents. This time they were dealing with the reality of coordinated attacks in several areas.
This is probably the most major we've had in recent years. There have been other major incidents that we've dealt with in the past, but we're coping. We are not overwhelmed.
Tonight, more of those who suffered minor injuries were allowed to leave hospital. A chance for the reality to sink in and to reassure anxious relatives. Lauren Taylor, ITV News.
Well, let's get the latest now from one of the hospitals which has been receiving many of the injured, the Royal London, close to Aldgate Tube Station, just a little way to the east from here. Tim Hewitt is there. Tim.
Yes, Mark, the latest situation here is that 24 patients remain in the hospital. 7 are in critical condition, and we have this afternoon had one fatality, no identification on that person, nor have we been told whether it was a man or a woman. But one patient has died in the last couple of hours within the hospital. Earlier on today, nearly 200 people were brought here in quite extraordinary scenes. It's very, very close to Aldgate East Tube Station and just down the road from the city, not very far from Liverpool Street Station. We saw patients being brought in not only in a fleet of ambulances but also in double-decker buses, people in bandages, people wrapped in insulating material to keep them warm, to keep the shock down. And doctors have been treating a range of injuries, the most serious of blast injuries. These are mostly broken bones. We've also had this afternoon a lot of patients leaving. The walking wounded have been leaving in increasing numbers here, people with mainly cuts and bruises, problems with smoke inhalation. And round the back of the hospital there's been a line of ambulances waiting to take them home. But the latest figures, as I say, 24 remain in this hospital, 7 in a critical condition.
Tim Ewart, thank you very much indeed for that update. Well, the attack which claimed the largest number of lives was on a Piccadilly line train deep below street level in the tunnel between King's Cross and Russell Square station. The explosion took place in the rear part of the train. The emergency services led survivors and the injured through the tunnels past the bodies of those killed. Lawrence McGinty reports.
The front line of the war on terrorism came to King's Cross Station this morning. Commuters became unwilling pawns on the battleground as they were forced out into the open by the explosion on the Piccadilly line train almost beneath their feet as they fled the scene.
I was on the train underground and there was a huge bang, flash, and then the train came to a grinding halt and filled with acrid smoke and dust. But amazingly, there was no panic. Everyone remained very calm and sensible. And we just waited until someone came along and managed to prise the doors open, and we walked back along the track.
Suddenly it was a massive explosion, really big. People screamed, lights went out in all the carriages, it was filled with smoke.
The train was packed at the height of the rush hour. Even those that escaped were visibly shaken. The Piccadilly line train left King's Cross, a busy commuter station, on its way south to Russell Square. Hundreds of commuters, maybe 900, were on board. It pulled out from King's Cross Station, and at 8:56, just a couple of minutes later, an explosion ripped through a carriage. It was almost 30 minutes before police reached the train to lead people to safety. Victims from the front carriages walked past the dead and dying as they made their way back to the safety of King's Cross. This is what they would have seen as they made their escape, but in dense smoke and insufferable heat.
It's very hot down there. There's no ventilation because the ventilation system on the train will drop down to its lowest level. You will get problem with the heat of the passengers being in the tunnel for a long time, plus all the smoke and fumes from the explosion. So it's not pretty down there.
King's Cross has become almost synonymous with disaster. Almost 2 decades ago, 30 people died in a fire on the underground escalators. For those who remember, these scenes must have been especially disturbing. This morning's hard rain has turned to brilliant sunshine, but there's no good news from King's Cross. Once again, this London station has been the scene of a terrible disaster. We now know that 21 people died here this morning. The difference is, this time it was no accident, it was slaughter. Lawrence McGinty, ITV News at King's Cross.
Well, let's get the very latest now from Geraint Vincent, who's at King's Cross Station tonight. Geraint.
Mark, King's Cross, normally at this time one of the busiest places in London, a major thoroughfare, a crossroads, a tube station, a mainline train station. But tonight, as you can see behind me, it is totally deserted. And there is this eerie, disturbing silence which is punctuated only by the occasional emergency siren. There are thousands of people making their way home on foot here around the police cordon throughout the afternoon, but they too are very quiet, aware, no doubt, that 21 of their fellow commuters lost their lives underground here today in the most dreadful circumstances. In terms of what's been going on at the station throughout today, well, the emergency rescue operation came to an end at around lunchtime. The recovery operation, then the grisly task of getting the bodies of the people who died out of the tunnel, came to an end at about 3 o'clock. I say that only because we haven't seen any ambulances coming out of here, the main thoroughfare, out of the station for about 2 or 3 hours, although we are seeing now ambulances going back into the scene. So there is every chance, I think, that more bodies could be recovered from here. Mark.
OK, Geraint Vincent, thank you very much for that. At least 7 people were killed in the explosion on the train close to Liverpool Street Station in the city and Aldgate Station. Ben Scotchbrook is there for us this evening. Ben.
Mark, as you say, I'm in Aldgate, on the edge of the financial heart of our capital city, and this is where the terrorists struck first. Now, if you look here now, you can see that it looks like a very busy corner of London. That's a very recent development. The police cordon that's been in operation here for much of the day only recently lifted while they were left free to do the work they had to do. The first blast, as I say, to hit London went off at around 8:50 this morning as a train was going from Aldgate East over to Liverpool Street Station. The horrific consequence of that first blast, the sickening victory for the terrorists, if you like. 7 people dead, 10 seriously injured, and 100 so-called walking wounded. And we've heard already about how people had to walk along the train tracks past the carnage, past the ripped open carriage, past the bodies inside the carriage, past the bodies on the track around them. They then left the station as best they could, leaving from Aldgate Station away in the distance beyond the moving traffic. They also came out at Liverpool Street. That's where I spoke to one eyewitness who told me the horrific things that she had seen. And amazingly, she was still walking. She wasn't that badly injured. She was going to go to work for the day. Others, of course, needed medical help. And at one point, as we heard Tim Hewitt saying, he's at the Royal London Hospital. It's about a mile down Whitechapel Road here. There were people on double-decker buses wrapped up in those silver insulating blankets so they could get to the hospital, get to the doctors, get the medical help that they needed. Now, as I say, it's very busy here now, and thousands of people have been streaming past, obviously trying to get home. Buses are now running in this part of London, although others are really going to struggle to get home this evening. Many of them saying they'll come back to work tomorrow. Others have been told to stay at home.
And what about other survivors you've seen there, Ben? What sort of stories have they been telling you?
Stories that will haunt them and indeed people who hear them for the rest of their lives. Stories of simply going to work as they do every day, a bang going off, the train stopping, the lights going out, and then smoke seeping into the carriage, and a sickening wait while they had to wait for the underground staff to get to them. Obviously the tube line, the electricity had to be turned off as the underground staff then came to the carriages, helped people out of the carriages, and then along, as I describe, along the track, past the carnage, seeing their fellow commuters who weren't as lucky as they were, some being treated, some already dead, and then out into the open air to discover that it wasn't just one incident here, that this horrific attack was going on across London.
OK, Ben Scotchbrook there, thank you very much indeed. And let's cross now to Edgware Road Station, the scene of the attack which claimed at least 5 people's lives. Romilly Weeks is there. Romilly.
Well, Mark, at this one station alone, a total of 3 trains were affected. That's because the device was planted on one tube, but it was detonated precisely at the moment that 2 other tubes were passing. Was that coincidence, or does that suggest perhaps that the bomber was on the train and knew when to press the button in order to inflict maximum damage? That's what forensic scientists who are in the station behind me here now are trying to work out. We do know that there are 5 confirmed fatalities from here in Edgware Road, although one emergency services worker who I spoke to today suggested that there could be many more than that. He described hellish scenes underground. He said one carriage was almost completely ripped apart, and he said that he had to go along the track picking up body parts. If we can walk along here, you can see Edgware Road has been reopened. Earlier It resembled a car park for emergency services vehicles. There were so many wounded that they had to set up an emergency treatment centre in the Hilton Hotel, which is just behind the flyover here. The other significant factor about this location is that we are just metres away from Paddington Green Police Station, which is the UK's highest security police station. That's where all the terrorist suspects are taken to be questioned. All the other locations where the explosions happened were much more central than here. Perhaps Edgware Road was also put on the terrorist list because of this police station right here.
Romilly, thank you very much for that. Well, if you're just joining us now, we're on air with a specially extended programme with live coverage of today's terror attacks in London. At least 30 people have been killed in a series of coordinated explosions, 3 on the London Underground and 1 on a double-decker bus. An Islamist website posted a statement supposedly from Al-Qaeda claiming it was behind the attacks, but police said it was too early to tell who was responsible or if suicide bombers had been involved. Tony Blair, who returned to London from the G8 summit in Gleneagles, described the attacks as barbaric. Nina Hussain has the day's events.
It was the sight we'd always feared. One eyewitness described the roof of this double-decker almost floating off in the explosion, a description which doesn't at all prepare us for the carnage left behind.
I heard the bang, looked down, saw a cloud of grey smoke, and then later on found out that it was the bus that went off outside the building.
This wasn't the first blast to rock the capital this morning, it was the 4th, but it was the most visible in the heart of central London in the middle of the rush hour. It came as the city was waking up to, reacting to, and getting used to the news that London, like New York, like Madrid, was in the midst of some sort of terrorist attack. And the target was inevitable. London's vulnerable tube network had finally been hit.
People wanted to get to the back of the train away from the danger area, but there was nowhere for them to go. And then they took us off the train and made us walk all the way back past it all. Dead bodies on the tracks, train blown open.
You knew it was a bomb straight away, so just trying not to panic, really.
People started to scream because there was a burning smell, and everyone, just kind of long story short, thought they were going to die.
It's horrendous, just like a disaster movie. You just can't ever imagine being somewhere like that.
Unimaginable scenes underground. Overground, the confusion, the fear and the casualties. These scenes repeated in 3 separate locations, 3 separate blasts. One picture of devastation.
The situation is under control and the emergency plan is working.
By 3:30, the city's key coordinators gathered for the press conference we never wanted to witness.
This clearly was a callous attack on purely innocent members of the public, deliberately designed to kill and injure innocent members of the public.
July the 7th, 2005 was the morning after the night before this city, this country was celebrating the day when someone somewhere must have known they were going to bring London's party to an abrupt and tragic end. Nina Hussain, ITV News in central London.
Well, we could speak now to the former mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, who is in London today, and I'm sure he knows what sort of day this has been. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
What is your reaction to what has happened here today?
Well, my reaction is a great sense of sympathy and support for the people that have gone through this. I mean, having lived through this in my own city just a few years ago, I know how much pain this brings and how long it lasts. I mean, certain people unfairly and for no reason other than just being innocent citizens have been killed and harmed and hurt, and their families are going to have to live with this, and our hearts go out to them. But also there's a sense of real admiration for the people of London and the way in which they responded and their emergency services responded. You couldn't have asked for anything better in terms of, a resolute response. And I think that will stand them in good stead as they go through this.
But it is clear, isn't it, that we are not winning this war on terror?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that at all. I think we have made a lot of strides against the terrorists. This is now 3.5 years later. We've had terrorist attacks, but we haven't had anywhere near the number that we thought we were going to have back on September 11, 2001. The capacity and the scope of their attacks does not appear to be as great as it was back then. So I think that in the way in which you make progress against people like this, I think we've made a lot of progress, but it's obviously not enough, and we've got to do more.
Okay. Rudolph Giuliani, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, in the last few moments, police have confirmed the first 2 people to die in the bus explosion. More on the bus and a little bit later on. But let's go now to Jonathan Wills, who's close to the scene of that bus blast, I'm told. Jonathan, what more can you tell us?
Well, Mark, the number 30 bus, which was travelling from Hackney to Marble Arch at 9:17 this morning when it was ripped apart by explosion, that is about 600 yards away from us here at Russell Square, which is undergoing its own recovery operation at the moment following the tube explosion which killed 21. Well, that was at 9:17. At 9:47, as I say, just half an hour later, the bus, the number 30, turned into Tavistock Place. At that time, it may have had commuters, perhaps some shoppers on board who were heading off to the summer sales at Oxford Street. Well, Stuart Neld was on his motorbike just behind the bus on his way to work and joins us now. Stuart, tell me exactly what you saw at the time.
Well, I just turned into the road from Euston Road and I was following along behind the bus when suddenly there was a loud explosion. It was a muffled thud, a lot of smoke and some dust, and I saw what looked like the side of the bus or the top of the bus being flung against the building, perhaps the British Medical Building.
We've actually got some shots of the bus that were taken, I think by yourself at the time, still photographs of it. Just tell me exactly what you saw precisely at that particular time and your thoughts while you were even taking these photos.
Well, as I'd been riding along down the road previously, I'd gone past Edgware Road and there were people evacuating there, so I thought something may be up. Something came over the radio then saying there'd been an explosion or an electrical problem at Liverpool Street, and so that would explain all the number of people on the street as well. I got to the fire station and the ambulances and police had stopped the traffic to allow the fire engine out, and at that point, when the road was clear and I could turn into the road, at first I thought it was just some people messing around, maybe some builders playing up with each other, but because of the other incidents, I realised that it had been an explosion. At that point people were running away, there was a lot of panic. I turned down a side road to get away from the road. We couldn't get through, we couldn't get past.
And how have your thoughts changed during this day? Because I know you went to work afterwards.
Well, yes, it's very unnerving. People say it's like a movie, but it's nothing like a movie. In real life, it's terrifying. But I was here and I had to go into work. We shouldn't let people like this stop us from going about our normal business.
And what is clear is that Londoners around have been trying to keep going as best they can.
Yes, absolutely. There are people staying at work until late. There's people at work offering other people the chance to stay at their houses because of the public transport problems.
And your thoughts about the perpetrators of something like this?
It's just sickening. I can't understand how people can do this, how you can believe that normal members of the public are legitimate targets. It's just not right.
Stuart, many thanks indeed for your thoughts for now. And Mark, as you mentioned there, it's been confirmed to date that 2 people have died on that bus.
Jonathan Wills, thank you very much. And I should just update you, we now understand that 37 people have been killed today. Well, for Tony Blair up at Gleneagles for the G8 summit, he started the day thinking that Africa and climate change were the only problems he had to deal with. But the Prime Minister is now facing the biggest terror attack this country has ever known. He arrived back in London this afternoon and immediately went into a meeting with his emergency response team. He then delivered a statement calling the attacks barbaric, but vowing that the terrorists would not win. John Ray is up at Gleneagles tonight. John, is this now a summit in ruins, overshadowed completely by what's happened here? I'm sorry. We are now going to see a report from John Ray.
Yesterday, Mr. Blair was here celebrating London's Olympic victory. This morning, he began with hopes and ambitions high for Africa and the environment. Tonight, his summit continues, but the host for the moment is absent, and the world's attention is elsewhere.
A few minutes can be a long time in politics. First thing this morning, a Prime Minister and a President strolled in the sun. Their mood warm, their outlook upbeat.
I thought. But thank you for your leadership. This is going to be a successful summit.
But even as they spoke, the first bomb had exploded. Mr. Blair was given the news by Downing Street aides. Moments later, as host of this summit, he emerged to greet his guests. The relaxed, easy atmosphere had vanished. Mr. Blair, tense and deep in thought. Inside, he briefed his fellow leaders. At this stage, details were still sketchy, but he had an anxious audience. Terrorism has touched each of these men in one way or another. The war on terror has at times divided them, but today those divisions were put to one side. The display of unity every bit as important as the words they'd agreed.
We are united in our resolve to confront and defeat this terrorism that is not an attack on one nation, but on all nations and on civilized people everywhere.
The war on terror goes on. I was most impressed by the resolve of all the leaders in the room. Their resolve is as strong as my resolve, and that is we will not yield to these people. We will not yield to the terrorists.
Yet the terrorists forced Mr. Blair to abandon his summit for a time. He insists there'll still be deals on climate change in Africa, but today the world's most powerful men looked powerless, and that, of course, was the terrorists' intention. John Ray, ITV News, Gleneagles.
Our political editor, Nick Robinson, is at Downing Street tonight. Nick.
Well, Mark, the Prime Minister is preparing to leave here tonight to go back to that summit in Gleneagles. He was shocked, of course, by today's attacks, but certainly not unprepared. Ever since that attack on 9/11/2001, ever since those attacks in Madrid last year, ever since the election, he has feared, he's been briefed, he's known that it's more than likely to happen here. And so today it was. And his message was clear, a message I suspect he'd rehearsed in his mind many times. A message of condemnation, yes, a message insisting that although it was Islamic terrorism, it seems, although he didn't tell us how he knew, that many Muslims, the vast majority, he said, would condemn these attacks. A message, in effect, of business as usual, saying that he would go back to that G8 summit. And a message, too, saying that the values of terrorism would not defeat the values of Britain. Now, why did the Prime Minister come here? Well, partly to be seen, but partly to be briefed by ministerial colleagues. The Home Secretary, of course, in charge of the security operation, the Health Secretary in charge of the Health Service, and also the Transport Secretary. They've briefed him now. He returns to the G8 summit and then will come back to London tomorrow, confident that all that can be done is being done, confident that what the country wants, what the world must see, is that the G8 summit will continue, that the deal will be done on Africa and on climate change too, confident that on this, the country's with him.
Nick Robinson, thank you. So tonight, a group supposedly linked to Al-Qaeda has taken responsibility for the attacks. The organisation, calling itself the secret group of Al-Qaeda's jihad in Europe, has never been heard of before, but police are making no comment on suggestions that suicide bombers were involved. Our UK editor Tom Bradby has this report.
For most of today, people have been simply too stunned to think of it. But as the night draws in, increasingly the question is likely to be, who could have done this to us? It was clear this morning that the security services didn't have an answer. But tonight, the forensic teams move in. And as they sift through every piece of debris, detectives will be trawling through hours of CCTV footage to try and identify where and when the bombers boarded the bus and entered the tube system. The blasts at Liverpool Street and Aldgate, at Edgware Road Station, Russell Square and Tavistock Square were all relatively closely grouped together. Edgware Road is, of course, an area heavily populated by the Muslim community, a reminder that this was not an attack by Islam on the West, but by a small group of extremists on all of us. Shortly after the explosions, a group calling itself Al-Qaeda of Jihad Organisation in Europe posted an internet message saying it was responsible and claiming the attacks were in revenge for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many experts treated the claims with scepticism. But what is clear is that Al-Qaeda is not so much a single organisation as an idea that many different groups claim allegiance to and act in the name of.
This is a movement that has no regard at all for civilian life, and they know that a coordinated attack is likely to be more lethal, so they were deliberately attempting to cause mass casualties and, of course, to disrupt the economic life of the capital. So I'm pretty certain that this attack was carried out by part of the network of Al-Qaeda.
To understand the way Al-Qaeda works, you must go back to bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan in the 80s. Thousands of men passed through here, and the truth is, we don't know who they were or where they are. They fanned out across the globe, spreading his ideology and method.
The people who trained in those camps, thousands of these individuals, have spread out around the world. They've caused wars and started wars in countries such as Algeria, and obviously some of them will have come to Britain. They're also almost a virus, really, when they get here, because they're able to recruit young extremists in Britain, young militants, and they're able to train them in the techniques they've learnt in the camps in Afghanistan. So they become very dangerous individuals, and that's really what Al-Qaeda has become.
Today's attack does bear striking similarities to the one in Madrid last year, which was carried out by a loosely affiliated group mostly made up of Moroccans. Who is responsible for this? Well, we just don't know yet, but whoever they are, tonight they have many hundreds of police officers and security agents upon their tail. Tom Bradby, ITV News.
And Tom Bradby joins me now. So claims of responsibility, but we can't really say with any certainty who did this.
No, we really can't, and I think they'd be making arrests if they had any idea, to be honest. I think what I can say is sort of a couple of weeks ago, about 6 weeks ago, just down there in Whitehall, I was having a meeting with two very senior intelligence officials, and this was the precise subject of discussion. Would London be attacked, and what kind of attack would it be? And we were discussing who might do it, and they said they were very worried, in particular about people coming back from Iraq. People were dropping out of the system here, going to Iraq, being radicalised, and then slipping back in. They said, I said, well, does that mean then that we're talking about localist extremists exclusively? And they said, well, no, actually, there was an attack that they believe they foiled last summer, which they believe they connected directly to the remnants of the AQ leadership in Pakistan. So it could be either or at this stage. I think the important thing for people to understand is about those camps. We didn't realise at the time that they existed what a monster it was going to create. As you heard there are thousands of these people all across the globe, and we don't know where they are.
And are your security sources telling you whether they believe this is the end of this particular spate of attacks?
They're not saying for sure. My hunch is, and my feeling about what they think is, that this is the end. These attacks are often planned long in advance. For example, the one in Istanbul, I was told, was planned 4 or 5 years in advance. Not the timing. Of course, that would have been adjusted for the GA. But this may have been thought about, conceived a very long time ago. It was obviously designed for maximum impact in the rush hour. My sense is that probably we've had the attack.
And are we talking about a pretty serious failure in intelligence here?
I think you have to say, you just have to, when you've got an attack like this, of course it's a very serious failure of an intelligence. In their defence, they would say, you've heard the goalkeeping analogy, they've had balls coming at them all the time. They believe they have prevented quite a lot. I'm afraid they said, and going back to that meeting 6 or 8 weeks ago, they said, look, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. And I said, well, look, we've heard that, but they said, listen, I'm telling you, it is going to happen.
OK, Tom Bradby, thanks very much for joining me here this evening. Now, initial reports this morning suggested the explosions on the underground were caused by a power surge, but then in one moment it became clear that London was under a coordinated terrorist attack. That was the moment when a blast ripped through a double-decker bus no more than a mile from here. The force ripped the bus apart, blowing the roof onto the road. Tonight, police have confirmed that at least 2 people on board have died. ITV News correspondent Chris Choi was at the scene within minutes of the terrifying explosion. This is his report.
The number 30 runs from Marble Arch to Hackney, the heart of the overground system. On board, passengers packed into a rush hour double-decker. At 9:47 this morning, they were an easy and helpless target. Minutes after detonation, I was close by as medics rushed to help.
You can see medics literally running backwards and forwards. We've seen them over the last few minutes bring in stretchers and trolleys, oxygen, even medical supplies in supermarket carrier bags. It seems like they've scrambled all the local medical facilities in this part of London.
It's an area at the heart of the capital's Transport Zone 1. This was the place and the time for maximum bloodiest impact. 1.2 million use buses each morning in this zone. Eyewitnesses soon revealed what had happened to the bus and its occupants.
It was initially I heard a large explosion. I looked out of my office room window and I saw some people standing and pointing out towards in the direction of what was the bus. And the glass at the front of the building had been blown in. We could see that there were bodies on the ground.
Roof ripped off, seats hurled into the road. All this is consistent with the bomb being inside the bus, as was the strength of the explosion.
You could still see the top of the bus was blowing off and there was debris all over the street. And people were just panicked on their cell phones trying to get a hold of their loved ones.
What does this devastation tell us about the device and people behind the blast?
A bomb exploded on the upper deck of the bus. The roof of the bus was removed by the explosion. I would imagine that there were very significant casualties inside the bus, both on the top and lower decks.
The London attack is chillingly reminiscent of these suicide bomb attacks on Israeli buses. Security experts think terrorists would have wanted this visual impact. They were not just seeking injury and death, they were looking also for front pages.
One of the things that the bus attack does is that it provides a visual image of the explosion, and will perhaps become the iconic image of today's events.
There are still no death and injury figures from this bloody carnage, but tonight we do know the bus driver survived.
All our hearts and souls go out to him and his family, but as far as we've been told, he's fine and well, and helping police with their ongoing inquiries into this awful matter.
London buses are one-person operated. The driver is likely to have come face to face with the bomber, an attacker who could do all this, a killer who climbed aboard a crowded London bus, intent on this murder. Chris Choi, ITV News, Central London.
Now, just a reminder of that emergency number for people who are worried about friends and relatives, and they can call the number on your screen now. It's 0870 1566 344. That's 0870 1566 344. Now, I can tell you there is quite an eerie feel about London tonight. I don't know if you can see down on our other camera, right down Whitehall, normally one of the busiest streets in London, certainly at this time, just sort of late end of the rush hour, that would be packed. Very few cars there tonight, and interestingly enough, just a few buses. Now, we understand London buses, at a standstill for most of the day, are now running again, and there you can see for yourself. But I suppose the question is whether people want to get on a London bus after what's happened today is quite another matter. But on my way down here, I just drove down a road which had very few cars, but just streams of people walking along the pavements, walking along the road as well, trying to get home because of the lack of public transport. Now, I don't know whether you can see over my other shoulder here, people just sitting on a wall at a bus stop waiting for a bus, and I suppose the good news for them is that the buses are running in. But an eerie feel to London tonight. Trafalgar Square behind me empty, unlike last night, but our sense of defiance as well. Well, we're not far short of 7 o'clock, a time when London should be filled with people, as I said. Tourists and commuters now making their way home as best they can. But tonight London is a very different place. What started out as a day of panic and terror has turned into a night of silence. Keir Simmons has been out and about in London and has this report.
At times today, parts of London
one of the greatest cities in the world, was simply silenced. This was Piccadilly Circus, famous for its crowds, almost empty. But at other times there was panic, an unease which soon persuaded many simply to get away. This morning, queues of cars blocked the main east route out of the city, the traffic jam snarling back over Tower Bridge. Those without transport simply walked.
Scary. A little boy at home, so I come in on the central line, so it's quite scary.
Just keep walking and walking, see where we get. It's just chaos up that way.
7 explosions, can you tell me what time?
Outside a closed Victoria station, rumours about the numbers of explosions involved, the numbers of people killed. By the afternoon, thousands upon thousands of people evacuating the city. Soon, streets that would have been congested were clear, and though there were streams of people still on foot, many said nothing as they walked. The London Eye was closed, and as I travelled through Covent Garden shopping centre at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I didn't see one shop that was open. Tonight, London is a city in shock, an empty place. Keir Simmons, ITV News, Central London.
And those scenes of disruption and chaos are continuing tonight. Let's cross to Traffic Link, where we can see how the attacks are affecting the city. At London Bridge, we can see the last of those people who were already in London when the attack happened, making their way home tonight. Thousands of people have been steadily leaving the capital through the day. This is Liverpool Street Station, where 7 people were killed. On a normal day, the station would be teeming with people trying to get home. And King's Cross Station, where 21 people are confirmed to have died. The rescue operation ended at lunchtime there. And that's it from me for now. There's continuing coverage of this developing story on the ITV News channel. And join Trevor McDonald for a special programme tonight, which goes out on ITV1 at 9 o'clock. This city's been attacked before, and there is a defiant resilience among the people here. But after what happened today, London is a very different place, and Londoners are very different people. It's a city that has always been vulnerable, but which feels its vulnerability tonight, perhaps more than ever.
Repeatedly, we've been warned that something like this would happen. But today, when it did, it shook this city and this country to the core. The number of dead continues to rise this evening. New York, Bali, Madrid and Istanbul. Now London has become the latest city to be dealt a deadly blow by terror.
Due to today's events in London, there are several changes to the schedule, including an ITV News special. That's at 9 o'clock.